Yeah, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the NBA Deeper Dive, presented by PrizePicks. I'm Eric Lindquist. We don't have a whole lot of time to chat, to kind of kick back. But first of all, Adam, how was your first night of NBA? That is, of course, Ship My Money DFS over there on the other side. I'm talking fast. I'm getting going fast because I know we have 11 games to get to. But how was your first night, my dude?
Not great. Fell asleep in the fourth quarter of the last game, winning like 120,000.
Oh, Jesus.
Down 6,000. I knew it was coming before I went to sleep. That's why I didn't even bother sweating it, but still sucked to wake up. And, there was like that slight feeling of like maybe some miracle happened and I didn't get past by 100 teams, but I did. So didn't go great, but looking forward to tonight.
Yay, basketball. No, I was doing the Slate Starter podcast with Ryan. We've been firing that up here every night, but we saw that you were near the top of that leaderboard. I was cheering for you until I wasn't because literally it was sadness. But that's kind of the way NBA goes. You had the studs go off there in that evening game as well. You needed Pat Connaughton and Patty Mills. What an enjoyable little slate that was. Hope all of you smashed. I did not, but something you should smash. The like button. How about that for a segue? We're already off to a better start than Adam and I's show yesterday or 2 days ago or whatever it was. I'm looking forward to it, but hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. That is what you're going to want to do for this NBA season. This is kind of, for me, the official start because we have a gigantic slate. We're able to go through game by game, breaking down prices, doing the thing. Out of all the DFS sports, NBA is my favorite. How about yourself?
Yeah, same. Well, I mean, football, but it's either football or NBA.
I love NFL Sundays. I think it's a little bit of crack cocaine actually on Sundays. It's an enjoyable experience. It's just so fun to be able to sit there and enjoy a nonstop sweat. Things happen very, very quickly. In NBA, it's a little bit of a slow burn and it can really be painful, especially when you don't have a lot of Patty Mills. That'll hurt you a little bit yesterday, but let's get to it, shall we?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. We've got Indiana +2 at Charlotte, 223.5. Again, just starting to talk NBA. This is so fun. We have Karis LeVert out here. We have TJ Warren, Keelan Martin out for the Indiana side, excuse me. And then the Charlotte Hornets. Terry Rozier is now questionable. That was an add to the report here this afternoon. But starting from the Indiana side, we've got Malcolm Brogdon. He looks like it's all right, but some of these prices are just kind of way, way up there on these guys. But Sabonis for me. If you're going to be spending salary on these slates, we only have a few guys projected around 50 points on the slate. He's got to go in that bucket. How do you think he's impacted by Miles Turner returning to this rotation?
I mean, it hurts his production because you're just getting less minutes at the 5. You're getting fewer rebounding opportunities. Sabonis is always a high upside option. He's always a triple-double threat. He's a very good fantasy producer regardless of who's on the floor. But his production does increase when he's playing without Miles Turner. So Turner being back does knock him down a little bit. I think that it's enough. It basically pushes him into the category of, being fine in tournaments on this slate, I think, but not being someone I'm prioritizing because, like you said, there's plenty of value to get up to Sabonis's price tier. But the issue is that you then also have the real studs on the slate underpriced. So Karl Anthony Towns on DraftKings is $100 less expensive than Sabonis. Embiid and Jokic aren't that much more expensive. It's going to make it so it's difficult to get there. At the same time, it's also going to make him very low owned. So still a high upside tournament option, but not a priority just because I think he's priced where he should be, whereas a lot of people are not.
Malcolm Brogdon, a guy who had some massive upside. I remember right around April, basically Miles Turner went out in that middle of April side. And there was some massive explosion games from Malcolm Brogdon. Tailed off. He was hurt, very, very limited there in that play-in tournament that they ended up playing. They ended up losing to Washington, I believe, in that. Not enjoyable. But I think looking at Miles Turner might be another guy to kind of maybe take some shots on. I know that's Josh's boy. I'm curious if he had any words about him this morning.
I don't think he really mentioned them, but I'm someone that plays Turner quite a bit as well. But here it's I just feel similarly about Brogdon and Turner as I do to Sabonis relative to the slate. I think that all three are priced around where they should be. 7,500 on DraftKings for Brogdon, 5,700 for Turner. Those are all just perfectly fine price tags. They still have a ceiling there, but they just don't project nearly as well for their salaries as a lot of players on this slate do, because there are just so many mispriced players. So it's more so mixing these guys in as relatively low owned options in tournaments than it is prioritizing them or using them in cash games.
And I mean, it's an 11 game slate. There's a lot of places to go, but Terry Rozier, it was very strange this afternoon. That was one of the guys that popped up on the injury report. He's questionable now going into tonight. I don't think we have any official word. That's what we have Loco for here. El Negro Loco, he's the news god. He's in the chat, in the premium Discord, helping you guys out, find all the information. But Terry Rozier, I don't have him in anymore, and that makes LaMelo Ball jump off the page for me. What are you kind of seeing from the Charlotte backcourt, excuse me?
So one thing I wanted to mention on Indiana was Chris Duarte's
way too cheap.
DraftKings.
Yeah,
he's only 30. Yeah, only 3,300. I'm assuming he's going to play, upper 20s in minutes. He dominated usage in the preseason, had a 26.8% usage percentage, averaged 1.06 DraftKings points per minute. Even assuming that comes down, playing more minutes alongside Brogdon and Sabonis, 3,300 still, I think, one of the better value options on the slate. As far as the Charlotte side, I still have Rozier in for right now. If he is ruled out, then I agree there is just more usage available, more stats to go around for guys like Ball and Hayward. But I don't view it as quite as big of a bump just because I think both of those guys are touching the ball ahead of Rozier anyway. So, okay. I think it's a benefit for him or for both of them. But I don't think it's a situation where you see, for example, like Brandon Ingram without Zion Williamson. I don't think you see that kind of bump if Rozier is out. But it would make both of those guys look a little bit better.
I tell you, one guy that I might have some interest in, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on him, because, he's only got like a 10 projection for us right now. But if you lose Terry Rozier, would Ish Smith possibly be a contender to jump into that starting rotation?
Yeah, I don't really know what they would do with the starting lineup. There's so many ways they can go because Charlotte has so many guys that can play multiple positions. Like you could just go, LaMelo, Oubre, Hayward, Washington, Plumlee. You could slide Ish Smith in place of Rozier for sure. There's a couple of different, you could put Martin in the lineup. We saw them do that a lot last year, use him as kind of a spot starter and then keep the bench rotation the same. There's a lot of different ways they could go. If they do go with Ish Smith, it's actually still, I don't think that good of a play on DraftKings because somehow Smith is $4,200. He's actually priced, like I assume Smith would be like $3K. He's $4,200. So he's kind of priced like, where he should be. And then you also, you have all these first round rookies that are like 4K on DraftKings. You have Duarte, who we just talked about at 3,300. So even if Ish Smith starts, it would make him like playable, but it wouldn't make him anything that I'm like overly interested in.
Yeah, not crazy, but in a starting rotation, he gets 25, 30 minutes in that spot. And you're looking at somebody that decent enough producer, just a way to get different. Anything that isn't down there in Duarte and a guy we'll get to later, Scotty Barnes. If you're not playing those two as value pieces, you can kind of find and mix and match a lot of these different guys. And considering he might not get any attention if that news comes out really late, somebody that I just want to have on people's radar. Anything else from the Charlotte side for you?
Not really. It's sort of just, I feel pretty similarly about the Charlotte guys as I do the Indiana guys other than Duarte. Certainly not going to tell anyone not to roster LaMelo Ball. He's got a massive ceiling and he's reasonably priced, $200 more expensive than Brogdon. Same can be said for Gordon Hayward, who I think slots in behind LaMelo Ball, but still gives you a pretty nice ceiling. But compared to, just all of the other really, really good options on this slate, not as appealing as some of the others. LaMelo would be my favorite play from the team though. All
righty, let's move it along then. We have so much to get to. We have next up the Chicago Bulls at Detroit. 5 spread. Chicago's favored by 5, 219 for the game total here. Kobe White is out for Chicago. That's kind of negligible for me. And Cade Cunningham, definitely something to take note of on the Detroit side. The favorite to win Rookie of the Year here this season will not be playing for Detroit. I don't know. Let's start with the Chicago side, the visiting side here. Feels like a pretty thin basketball team today. Maybe you have a ceiling with guys like Vooch and Levine, but I'm really not seeing it considering you're adding DeRozan, Lonzo Ball into the mix, maybe some shots on somebody on the cheap rent, but I really don't see anything from Chicago.
Yeah, it's same situation for me. Vooch, Levine, DeRozan, Lonzo. It's not like it would be shocking if any of these guys go out there and get you 50, 45, 50 fantasy points. It's certainly in the range of outcomes, but it's the first regular season game we're seeing from this team. We don't know exactly what the offense is going to look like when you have Vooch and Levine having to share the ball with DeRozan. Lonzo, clearly he's going to have the ball in his hands a decent amount as well. It's just, it makes their projections sort of flatten out and makes it difficult to prioritize any of those guys. So it's, I hate saying it, but it's going to come up a lot on this slate. When you talk about a lot of these really good players, they're fine in tournaments. They have a ceiling, but they're just not guys I expect to get a lot of because there's, 2 and 3 like tiers of players ahead of them that are just basically mispriced. So high ceilings from all of those guys, but not really priorities for me. I do think it's worth mentioning that on FanDuel, Patrick Williams only 4K with small forward and power forward eligibility. Not a bad price tag on him there.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Somebody then in his sophomore year maybe can take a step. Just hard to see crazy amounts of ceiling for any of these guys. Just a little bit of cannibalization of each other's production. So it's something to keep note of. Hopefully those prices can adjust and come down a little bit, because I'm not paying $9K for Vooch today with the center studs who have all the production on their side. Let's go to Detroit. I think this is definitely the more pressing talking point. Cade Cunningham out. Not that we've ever seen him play in the NBA, but we understand you don't end up being the number one pick and not project him for a bunch of workload. But we've got Jeremy Grant sitting there in the top end. He's for sure pulling the most ownership, 13.9% ownership for him on this slate. Nobody else pulling anything from this team. And Jeremy Grant definitely could be an offensive focal point here in this spot. You're not exactly getting him free, but he's projecting out well enough. How much of him are you getting on this slate?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't run anything yet, but I do think Grant stands out, especially relative to, his teammates. Only 6,500 on DraftKings, a really nice price tag for him. He's likely to be the highest usage guy on the team. I think that, we saw last year that he kind of just had another gear offensively that coming into last year, I don't think a lot of people thought that he had. I kind of expected him to just be, to shoot more, but not to really translate to a lot of fantasy production. But he was a lot better than I expected. I think he's a solid option here. 6,500, not the most expensive price tag either. So I think Grant looks pretty good. I think that among mid-range options, he's one of the better ones at his salary.
All right. I think so, but it's still 6,500. I got to think Isaiah Stewart. I mean, 6,100. We saw him start to come alive a little bit. He did so many weird rest things at the end of that season. It's hard to really kind of identify exactly what that output's going to be. They were basically just resting every dude, making sure they didn't get hit towards the end there. But I don't think Sadiq Bey or Josh Jackson are really going to be cannibalizing any of Jeremy Grant's shot attempts here, shot volume. 6,500, it's a low number. I just expect him to be popular. So maybe, I maybe getting to a lot of him might be something that happens. I just don't really have a good feel for it here yet, as of yet. And of course, a lot of my positions, a lot of where I'm paying up at is center on this slate, on DraftKings specifically. So on FanDuel, apparently now you can play three of them because there's guys like Miles Turner who are power forward eligible. What in the world? Anything else from the Detroit side for you?
So just a couple of specific points on Jeremy Grant. I think one thing that makes it difficult to get him in a lot of lineups is just that because of all the value on the slate, as good as Grant looks at 6,500, it's not gonna be that tough to get up to, like a Van Vliet or a LaMelo or, someone in like the 8K range. But where I do think Grant's really interesting on DraftKings, he's only $600 more expensive than Jaren Jackson. Jaren Jackson's a good play, like no doubt about it, but 28% ownership projected for Jackson right now, 12.7% for Grant. I think they project pretty similarly. I don't think the range of outcomes is that different for those two guys. So Grant as a pivot away from Jackson specifically, I think makes a lot of sense. Outside of that, not a whole lot that stands out for me on the Pistons. You mentioned Isaiah Stewart, certainly has a high ceiling, but very, very difficult to pay down at center tonight, I think, because three of the absolute best plays on the slate, best pay up options are centers. So it makes the opportunity cost really, really high at that position, especially when there's so much really good value at other positions. But if you are paying down at center and then paying up at, guard and forward spots as, a way to be contrarian, I think going to someone like Isaiah Stewart, someone like Robert Williams, who we'll talk about, those are the kind of guys that I would want to get to, guys that have the ability on a per minute basis to just put up some massive numbers. And, not that it's going to happen often, but potentially give you 40 plus fantasy points. I really don't think center is a position where you can afford to play, this guy's going to 6X and get me 25 points. I think that's a horrible strategy tonight. If you're going to not be paying up at center, I think you need to at least get very high upside mid-range guys.
What a great segue by you, because we're going to go to the Boston game, +2, New York next 217. We just got a piece of news that Josh Richardson is going to be out tonight. That was in the chat. Again, thank you so much to Loco. Makes it super easy. It was almost like it was meant to be that this piece of news drops here. We already know Al Horford's going to be out here, and you just brought up Robert Williams, who on a per minute basis last season, 1.27 DraftKings points per minute, which trails Jason Tatum by 0.01. And if Robert Williams just gets minutes, we know that he can be an absolute terror on the basketball floor and get things done. He's 5,100 at the center position. I'm not going down to the middle of the center position very often, but if I do, it's going to be for guys like Robert Williams here.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's how I approach it as well. It's still risky because as well as Williams projects, like for me, I'm expecting him to play 24, 25 minutes. I have that, puts him around 29 to 30 DraftKings points. There's still a pretty good chance, like he can get those 30 points. And you would say, oh man, Robert Williams did well for 5,100. He's probably giving up 25 to 30 raw points at his position. So that's really difficult to come back from. But at least with Williams, he's such a productive player when he's on the floor. He gives you a chance to get 40 to 50 points at 5,100, which would make things really interesting because it would let you pay up at other positions where people can't if they're rostering Embiid, Towns, Jokic, etc. So Williams at least has that in his range of outcomes, which is nice. He projects as a good value. The thing working against him is just the position that he plays.
And now let's talk about the top end. We ended up getting Jaylen Brown ruled in. He's going. He did not have COVID apparently, so there's that. That's good. Jason Tatum is 9,400. Feels like it's an overpay now with Jaylen Brown in there. If he had been out, I think Jason Tatum would have been one of the more popular plays on the position, even against the Knicks team, even in one of the lower totals on the entire slate at 217. But do you still see any kind of a ceiling there where you think you might get to some Jason Tatum?
There's certainly still a ceiling just based on his talent level. Same can be said for Jaylen Brown, but he's nowhere near as appealing as he would have been if Brown was out. You're sacrificing a few points in terms of usage, potentially, a little bit in the peripheral stats as well. Tatum still has a ceiling in the same way that like Domantas Sabonis still has a ceiling. He's a really good player that can go out there and just dominate any given game, but it does lower his projection enough to where it just kind of ends up being a contrarian tournament play for me, as opposed to someone that I'm actively looking to get into lineups.
And the Knicks on the other side, Tom Thibodeau's team that just slows it down, grinds it down, and gives the ball to Julius Randle in pretty much all situations. You do have Kemba Walker kind of entering the equation there in the Garden. He's had some good experiences in the Garden going back to his UConn days. I don't give a shit about it. That's not analysis. I definitely look at Julius Randle, though, as somebody who also falls into that. If he's going to be relatively unowned, I think you can still take shots. We saw so many times where he would just really spikes into these massive ceiling games, and Tibbs loves to give his starters minutes. So for me, that kind of ends up being somebody at 8,800 on DK to kind of look at. Do you kind of feel the same way?
Yeah, the minutes is the biggest thing for me. I mean, in the Knicks' most recent preseason game, Julius Randle played 35 minutes. Most like I have most
no regard. No
like
regard.
The best players on this slate, first game of the season, I have trouble going higher than like 35 minutes. And this dude just played it in a preseason game. So I think there's a good chance that Randle, obviously if you could take the field versus Randle as far as, who plays the most minutes tonight, you would want the field. But when you point to any individual player, like if I have to guess who plays the most minutes tonight, Julius Randle is my guess, just because it's Thibodeau. He did it all year last year. Like that was one of the bigger edges at the beginning of last season, was getting over that hump where it's, everyone's saying, okay, Julius Randle, 36.5 minutes. And it's like, no, he's playing 40 like every single night. That was one of like the biggest edges at the beginning of last year. People were kind of slow to adjust to that. I think that expecting 38 minutes from him tonight is certainly reasonable given that it's Thibodeau and given the way Randle was used in the preseason once again. So 8,800, I think, is a very reasonable price tag. Someone mentioned this morning that he thought Kemba could hurt Julius Randle's production. I don't really think that's going to be the case. For one, you get, Kemba as a facilitator, Kemba running the pick and roll. That's something that can help out Randle. But also, even if you look at his numbers last year with Derrick Rose on or off the floor, his assist numbers took a little bit of a hit with Rose on the floor, but he was still getting his rebounds. He was still getting his usage, still producing, around 1.25 fantasy points per minute. So even if you're basically just saying now, okay, all of Julius Randle's minutes are going to come with a ball dominant guard on the floor, I still think he gets his. I still think he looks like a very good option.
Agreed. Somebody just said in the chat that he had backtracking on Jaylen Brown. He's saying himself he's a game time decision. He's in the confirmed lineup. That was earlier today. I think that I saw that news had hit where he was actually questionable. He's good to go, I think.
There were conflicting reports. The Celtics coach said Jaylen Brown's in and then released the starting lineup. At the same time, Jaylen Brown said Jaylen Brown is questionable.
That's nice of Jaylen Brown to be so forthcoming about Jaylen Brown. Not what I expected from an NBA player. I'm not going to play him regardless, but in the event that you see that he's out, just automatically play Jason Tatum at 9,400, right?
I mean, I'm not going to say automatically on this slate because there's still so many mispriced
Get
guys.
To shares of.
But yes, yeah, bump Jason Tatum for sure.
Okay, awesome. Anything else from this game for you?
RJ Barrett, 5,700, I think is a reasonable salary. On a lot of slates, he would look like a good value. Here, he kind of just looks like a middle of the road guy. But I do think he's worth mentioning just because he's another one that I expect to play quite a bit of minutes tonight.
All right. Well, I'm in absolute work mode here. I'm no cute and funny Eric today. There are no jokes. We're not having fun. We're not having fun, Adam. None of that here today. So what I think is fun, though, for everybody is if you check out our promotion we have going, Curry. It's great. 50% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Use the promo code Curry, as in Steph Curry. It's in the video description below there. That makes it only around $15. I believe it's $14.95 to take advantage of it. There it is. Tip off week sale, Awesemo Plus Platinum weekly pass. That gets you everything behind the paywall, our player projections, ownership projections, and of course, my baby, the NBA boom bust tool, which we will use as we kind of jump into the Toronto game for sure. I'm telling you, it is one of the best tools that you can possibly be using to help you really identify some of the best plays on the slates for tournaments, see kind of who's popping for cash games, see what their bust and boom potentials are. That's based on salary expectations. I'm telling you, best tool in the industry. We have it in other sports as well. Check out everything behind the paywall. Use that promotion, Curry. All right, let's keep it rolling. We've got Washington at Toronto. This game's going to take a little while because there's a lot to talk about. Washington, we have Rui Hachimura out, Thomas Bryant out. There's a 219.5 total, which isn't the most appealing part. What is that you have a guy right now on both sides of this game, starting with the Washington side. How do we not play just a ridiculous amount of Spencer Dinwiddie on DraftKings tonight?
Yeah, I don't really have an answer. He's 4,900 on DraftKings. He played 26 minutes in Washington's most recent game. You saw his playing time increase in every game of the preseason, 21, 22, 25, 26 minutes. I'm assuming he's going to be a full go or close to it tonight. I think, 31, 32 minutes from Dinwiddie is reasonable. And he's a productive player when he plays. Only played 3 games last season, but over a fantasy point per minute guy in games with the Nets going back the last 2 seasons, including the 3 last year. I think this is a good situation for him. He's shown he can produce alongside a ball dominant guard. Obviously he has that here with Bradley Beal, but there's nobody else that you really expect to be taking shots or touches away from Spencer Dinwiddie. I think he's going to have a productive year as long as he can stay healthy in Washington. And at 4,900, there's just not a whole lot of risk there. The only thing that really forces you to make decisions is the fact that there's a lot of really cheap guards tonight. So it keeps you from, saying, oh, I'm just going to play Dinwiddie everywhere. There's still a lot of other guys you're going to want to get to and only so many spots you can roster them in. But I think Dinwiddie does stand out as obviously one of the best values on the slate.
And then we're talking about ceilings. And I think looking at Bradley Beal, who is shooting guard, point guard eligible on FanDuel as opposed to point guard, shooting guard. I don't understand how all of this is working yet, but 9,400 for him over there. That really sticks out to me as well. Somebody who has a super ceiling is going to probably get as many shot attempts as he wants. 9,500 over on DraftKings. What's kind of your interest level in him, considering he's at a shooting guard position, little different than paying up for guys at center and power forward today?
Yeah, it's relatively low for me because there's just so much value at guard. If you look at the deep dive article I wrote earlier, there's just so many guards listed because the position's so deep today. It thins out at forward, and then at center, there's not really a lot of value. There's some dart throw guys for sure, some high upside guys, but center, is the spot where things can be really easy to pay up. So Beal still, he can go get you a really good game. The reason I think it's really tough to get to Beal, for one, he's priced where he should be anyway. Like his median projection is not great for his salary regardless. But then even if you do say, okay, let's say Bradley Beal goes and gets 55 points at 9,500, that's fine, except for you still have to figure out the rest of your roster. And there's a good chance that the value guards just destroy the value forwards tonight. And that you end up in a situation where 48 or 49 points at forward ends up being more useful than 55 from a $9,500 guard like Beal. So he always gives you a high ceiling, but it's just not a slate where I anticipate getting too much of him.
Is this the year, Adam Scherer, where Daniel Gafford gets the run at center?
I hope so. I'm really interested to see what their center rotation looks like once everyone's healthy. Tonight, though, I don't think you have to worry about it too much because you have Thomas Bryant out, you have Rui out. So the front court is thinner. I expect that you're getting 48 minutes from Daniel Gafford and Montrezl Harrell combined. We don't know for sure what the rotation will look like. It is a new coaching staff in Washington. If this were still Scott Brooks, I would be really confident saying that they don't go small and that you get 48 minutes from those two. With Unseld, who knows? Maybe you do see some smaller lineups. But my assumption is that you're getting 48 minutes or close to it from those guys. Daniel Gafford's a very high upside per minute producer. So is Montrezl Harrell. I am expecting something like 26 minutes from Gafford, 22 from Harrell. It makes them both look like very good plays at their salaries. The issue again is just the position, though. You can they certainly fall into that bucket of value centers that I will use if I'm paying down at center, but I just don't anticipate getting that much exposure to them because I want so much Towns and Embiid and Jokic.
Yeah, Wes Unseld. Not my apologies. I love that guy. But let's just play him in a bunch of Harrell and rotate them. Do you have any rules to make sure you don't get the same, or do you think that on this slate? Because for me, normally I don't know if I would have a rule over people projecting out this well when they're going to break down, but maybe if there's a hot hand here, plus you need both of them to go off, and that just seems unlikely in this spot.
There's no chance in hell I'm playing Gafford and Harrell in the same.
That's what I thought.
The opportunity cost for a roster spot is just so high with as many good value plays, as there are on the slate. If this were a 5-game slate where pricing are really tight, you could say, okay, Harrell projects well in his normal amount of run. Gafford projects well in his normal amount of run. You can play them together. Here, I don't think, if Gafford hits his medium projection, I don't think he ends up being a good play. If Harrell hits his medium projection, I don't think he wins you anything. There's just such soft pricing on this slate.
I was leading the witness. I know I don't want to play the two of them together. I'm very aware. It was more of a talking point for discussion. This is educational purposes. Everybody's just dusting off the old fantasy cruncher for NBA here. Definitely have a rule where you don't get the two of them, because you will crunch lineups, and I guarantee you will get probably exposure to the two of them together, both projecting with over 8%, both of them decent enough value. All right, now we go to the other side. As if we didn't have enough talking points. I guess Kyle Kuzma, any final thoughts on him, considering he's getting a boatload of ownership?
Yeah, he's fine to me. If he were a guard, I would have virtually no interest, but because there isn't quite as much value at the forward positions, Kuzma's just going to fit in pretty nicely into some lineups at 5,100. I don't love him here. I don't really feel any way about him. I think there are some rebounds to be had in this Washington front court. I think that he certainly could play a role as a floor spacer for Beal. I think there's going to be games where he disappears, because there's certainly going to be games where Beal just takes over and Dinwiddie, takes a bunch of shots. But I also think there's going to be games where, Kuzma benefits from getting some open looks. So I think Kuzma's fine. Not somebody that I'm jamming into tons of lineups, but I do think he's a good play.
All right. I don't have a ton of time to jump into the chat, but somebody just said they keep saying, this is Gordon Powell. He said they keep saying they must pay up at center, but seems to me to be a lot of solid mid-range options. Sure, there are, but I think the super ceilings on this slate exist at the center position, and that's where we want to kind of be spending our money.
Yeah, it's more so that, so for one, two of the pay up options at center are missing guys that they normally have, and it makes them more productive. But also it's just that there's massive amounts of really cheap value at the guard spots, and the guard pay up options just aren't as good as the center pay up options. So it's just going to kind of make it so the typical build is paying up at center, but there are a lot of high upside mid-range and value centers as well. It's certainly not saying, you have to play those guys. It's just from like the best, an optimal roster construction, I think tonight is typically going to be paying up at center. But yeah, you certainly can, somebody just mentioned Nurkic as an example. Certainly you can pay down for him in some lineups. You can go to Gafford, you can go to Williams, but more often than not, your best lineups are just going to have, some combination of Towns, Embiid, Jokic. All
right. And now we go to the Toronto side, Scotty Barnes, another guy. How do we not play an eternal amount of Scotty Barnes on this slate?
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea how to get away from this guy. Does everything when he's on the floor, produced relatively well in the preseason. And
at Florida State, he was a monster.
Yeah, absolute monster at Florida State. Not that it means a ton, but led the team in minutes in the preseason, averaged 1.07 DraftKings points per minute, only had a 17.6% usage rate, which on the one hand, you prefer it be higher, but the fact that he averaged over a fantasy point per minute while not even shooting that much, he led the team with a 29.5% assist percentage. If you look at the minutes he played alongside Van Vliet, his assist percentage was still 27%. So I think he's going to be heavily involved. I think that it doesn't even really matter that much at 3,400. He looks like one of the best plays on the slate.
Agreed. And you want to talk about other best plays on the slate? We have Fred VanVleet. We have Precious Achiuwa. We have OG Anunoby. Even Goran Dragic is somebody that, at $5K, you can definitely see a ceiling there for Goran Dragic. I know he's not exactly enthralled to be in Toronto, but hey, buddy, you're in Toronto. You're in the NBA. It's going to be okay. What are you looking at from the rest of this Toronto team?
Yeah, so Van Vliet, I think, looks like a strong option. He's only 7,500. He is one of those mid-range guards that I do want to be getting in lineups. He benefited a lot when he played without Pascal Siakam last year. Siakam's out tonight. Obviously, Lowry's not on the team anymore. You do have Dragic to some extent replacing Lowry's production most likely, even though I think it's still a net positive for Van Vliet. But I'm expecting him to play a lot of minutes. I'm expecting, like a 27% or so usage rate for him. Assist percentage probably approaching 30%. I'm expecting, 1.1 to 1.15 fantasy points per minute. So I think he looks very good. OG Anunoby is kind of a Kyle Kuzma-esque forward play on this slate. Not saying he's the same type of player as Kuzma, obviously, but I'm expecting him to play a lot of minutes. He's 6,100. He just projects as like a neutral play at his salary, which at Ford is somewhat useful on this slate. And then as a value piece, Precious Achiuwa, we haven't gotten a Toronto starting lineup yet. He started the last couple of preseason games. Someone in chat this morning said that Toronto beat writers had been guessing that Birch is going to be the starting center. I don't think it matters a ton either way. I'm expecting something, like 20 to 22 minutes for Achiuwa, 20 to 22 for Birch, Boucher playing the 4 and the 5. But with Achiuwa only at 3,100, he's a 1 to 1+ fantasy point per minute guy. If you're getting 20 to 22 minutes there and you have power forward eligibility, that ends up being a pretty good value play.
Anything else from this game? Because we got to get flying.
Nope.
Cool. Continuing on, we've got Cleveland +7.5 at Memphis, 216.5 total. Dean Wade and Dylan Windler out. Oh my God, everybody sound the alarm bells. And then Dylan Brooks for Memphis. He's out. That's definitely more of a concern here. Cleveland. This is one of the more unappealing teams on this slate. I mean, 105 implied team total will kind of do that to you. I can't believe Kevin Love is playing an actual basketball game. I cannot believe that Colin Sexton and Darius Garland are 8,300 and 7,600 respectively. Maybe some Jared Allen in my life, but what are you seeing from Cleveland? Because it looks garbaggio.
Yeah, pretty much Evan Mobley for me.
Okay.
Played 127 minutes in the preseason, averaged 0.98 DraftKings points per minute. Another guy that did very well producing peripheral stats, 16.2% rebounding percentage, 16.3% usage rate, 10.3% assist percentage, only 4,500. I'm assuming he plays around 30 minutes. I think he looks like one of the better value options at Ford. You can certainly pivot away from him, use some Lauri Markkanen at 4,100 in tournaments, but in cash, Mobley would be my guy. Outside of that, I don't really see much. Like you said, the pricing on Cleveland, it's weird. Like for the most part, the Cleveland pricing is just jacked up on a slate where for most players, it's pulled back. Sexton at 8,300. I mean, he was a good play at that salary sometimes last year when like the entire team was out, but that's not the case here. Same can be said for Garland at 7,600. I don't really see a whole lot here outside of Evan Mobley.
Yeah, and shout out Chris Baggs. Happy birthday. I didn't know it was his birthday. I'm going to have to send him a happy birthday text. Evan Mobley, USC guy. So there we go. Going to the Memphis. Anything else from Cleveland? Because it just is. The rest of it's just awful.
Somebody said Mobley could go crazy if the Cavs get blown out. I don't know why the Cavs need to get blown out for Mobley to go crazy.
Yeah, you could
it's probably less likely he goes crazy because if he goes crazy, they're not getting blown out.
Also, he's under 5K. So the risk of that still is less than it would be for like a 9K guy. But I digress. We head over to the Memphis side. Jaren Jackson Jr. really popping. We know that as long as he stays healthy, please stay healthy, my dude. One-time dealer on Jaren Jackson Jr. staying healthy because he is so much fun to watch. Desmond Bain, he's from the darkness. 21.6% for him. He's 3,200 on DraftKings. I guess that's why he's value there. Talk to me about Memphis.
So Jackson's a really interesting player here because I think he's a very good play. So I want to lead with that. I don't want anybody to misinterpret what I'm saying. I think Jaren Jackson at 5,900 is a very good play. I think he's getting a little bit too much steam if ownership projections are close to correct. Like we have him projected on DraftKings right now as the 4th highest owned player at 28%. I think he's a good play. I don't think that the gap between him and some of these other guys is quite that wide. I used Jeremy Grant as an example earlier, but you also can, go down to Evan Mobley at power forward. He's $1,400 less expensive and getting half the ownership. You can go down to, some other guys as well. So I think that Jackson's a very good play, but on a slate this big with so many good plays, he strikes me as someone I think is going a little bit over-owned. Normally on a slate like this, the guys that get the most ownership should be cheap because it's more difficult to find comparable ceilings with, your $3,500 guys or your 4K guys than it is with someone at 6K. So for Jackson, yes, I think he is underpriced, but I think that, let's say Jaren Jackson goes for like 40 points, or let's say Jaren Jackson goes for, 34, 35 points, like his median projection. That's good at his salary, but there's a pretty good chance guys in his price range, some guys in his price range do better than that. So I think Jackson is the best play from Memphis, but I do think he's going a bit overowned. Outside of him, I'm interested in Desmond Bane and the Anthony Melton for value. Bane, I'm assuming, is going to start in place of Dylan Brooks. He produced about 0.75 to 0.8 fantasy points per minute as a starter last year. If he plays 28 or so minutes at 3,200 on DraftKings, that projects as a pretty good option. The Anthony Melton, sort of the other end of the spectrum, very, very good point per minute producer. Very, very questionable minutes. He was someone that last year, it always seemed like he should get more minutes than he did. I don't know that changes this year, but if it does, he's got a massive ceiling. And even if he doesn't, he's 3,600. If he plays 20 to 22 minutes, he probably does okay for that price tag anyway.
All right, we got Loco. Gave me an update. Thank you, sir. James Borrego said the rotation will be 9 to 10 players deep tonight. And Gordon Hayward isn't on a minutes limit, but they're going to monitor his conditioning. That's interesting. But Terry Rozier is going to test out his ankle, but stated that it's an 82-game season, so he doesn't want to rush him back too early for the first game. Terry Rozier is not playing basketball tonight.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay. Well, I'm just throwing it out there. All right. Anything else from this game for you?
Nope.
Okay, cool. Moving on to Houston, plus 5.5. Also, hello, Spags. Happy birthday to my dude. Plus 5.5 here. Minnesota, 228.5 total. John Wall doesn't want to play basketball for Houston, and they don't want him to either. That was kind of an amicable goodbye. There we go. Daniel House, questionable. Garrison Matthews is out. Pat Beverly on the other side, out. Jordan McLaughlin, Jalen Noel, both questionable here. What are you seeing from this Houston side, considering, I don't know, Jalen Green's $4,200 on DraftKings?
Yeah, this is one guy, you and I talked about it before the show. I have no idea why he would only be 14% owned here. This is a spot where I expect to take a very big stand tonight if he remains projected where he is in terms of ownership. He is likely to play, 30 plus minutes, I think, for Houston. He produced at a pretty good rate in the preseason. He averaged 0.79 DraftKings points per minute, but he had a 22.3% usage rate, 14% assist percentage. This was the second overall pick in the draft. He played in the G League last year and produced pretty well. He's on a Houston. He's in a good matchup against Minnesota. I think that there's obviously a lot of competition amongst these $4K to $4,500 rookies and value options, but I really, really like Jalen Green here, especially if he's going to be lower owned than some of the other guys. So he's the one that stands out most for me.
I absolutely love him. 4,200 is just a broken price, and I will have an infinity amount if he's going to be 14%. And I understand there's a ton of value on this slate, but the guy, second overall pick, we are looking at some volume shooting here coming from Jalen Green this season. One of my favorites for rookie of the year. No question about it. I think he's just a fantastic play on this slate. The rest of this Houston team as well. We've seen some upside from Christian Wood, but 8K at 10%, I don't know. Do you see anything out of Christian Wood? Because he's the only other guy really pulling ownership here.
Would you rather play Jalen Green or Tyrese Maxey?
I would rather play both of them a lot.
Yeah, sure. But, I think Jalen Green, even ignoring ownership, I think Jalen Green's a better play than Tyrese Maxey.
I do too. I think Jalen Green's the best play on the entire slate. And
I think that's Scotty Barnes, but
okay. So 4,200, but I mean, 4,200 Jalen Green, I legitimately think could put up 50, like 55.
Yeah. I think it's possible, obviously not likely, but either way, yeah, right. I think Jalen Green's a great play. Christian Wood, Kevin Porter, particularly Christian Wood, I think are in that bucket of guys that aren't priorities, but certainly have very, very high ceilings. I would throw Şengün in there as well. If he were power forward instead of center eligible, I would really be interested in him. But at center, it's tough for me to go to somebody that I think plays like 15 minutes. But he has looked really good. He produced over 1.4 fantasy points per minute in the preseason, but probably just not really a slate that it's going to be easy to get to him at center. Jalen Green, the priority. Christian Wood, the second option for me. If you are playing 150 lineups and just for whatever reason need a low-owned 3K flat guy, Şengün, I think has some upside.
Yeah, I think it was a little inflated. So that last preseason game he's referring to, I know Daniel Tice was out for that. And then he just went completely nuclear, double with 4 blocks or 3 blocks or something like that. So it was a slate winning performance, like 40 spots. So somebody with some upside, maybe a different slate, but he is 3K, put him in a bucket of 3K guys. You can definitely play on one side of it. So sure, why not? Karl Anthony Towns, I'm going to have a crazy amount of him at center. He's 9,700. That's way too low for him. I understand D'Angelo Russell's alongside him, Anthony Edwards. So long as everybody's healthy here on this side, maybe it tempers expectations a little bit, but Karl Anthony Towns, probably my favorite overall play on the entire slate, underneath 20%. What are you doing with him?
Playing a lot of him. I think he's still probably my third favorite center, but
That's hilarious. Yeah,
that's
Embiid. I mean, Embiid. Let's be serious.
right.
But
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he might be my third favorite. He's my third favorite pay up option. He also just happens to be my third favorite guy at his position. But it's kind of splitting hairs there. I think that all three of those guys should be getting ownership. All three are some of the best options on the slate. This is clearly, to me, a stars and scrubs slate. That's another reason why I think the ownership on guys like Jaren Jackson and Gordon Hayward is it being as high as it is weird to me. Like, they're good plays, but I just see myself really prioritizing paying up for these guys, including Towns. He's averaged about 1.4 DraftKings points per minute last season. You get a good matchup against Houston here. The game has the second highest total on the slate. 29.6% usage rate, 21.6% assist percentage, 17.3% rebounding percentage for Towns overall last season. So I think, pretty clearly one of the best options tonight.
all right. And anybody else from the Minnesota side? For me, I see that other guys are starting to get some ownership. We've got D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, and everything else. I really don't have a ton of other interests other than Cat here.
Russell, Edwards, Beasley, all grayed out as like neutral plays to me. So guys that I expect to be low owned, and that makes them valuable in tournaments as just, a contrarian piece, but they're not guys that I'm building around. Whereas Towns is someone that I do expect to build around, because I think that, like, it's just, I think, for example, Russell at 8,500 in this spot, he's a good play. He's got a ceiling. He projects pretty well. He's not as good a play at 8,500 as Towns is at 9,700. Same goes for Edwards. Same goes for Beasley. All of those guys I think are good. Like, I'll be happy to get to them, but it's more so using them as contrarian pieces, whereas Towns is a core piece for me.
All right, let's talk about our sponsor PrizePicks here, unless you have anything else from that game.
Nope.
Okay, sponsor PrizePicks. If you haven't had a chance to go over there and play yet, now is the time. We have promo codes going with them all the time, but it's such a clean, easy site. It looks good. It's super easy to use. You pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players. You use them together to make a quote unquote lineup. You're basically making your parlay card where you're able to put them together to up to 10x your entire entry fee. It is super easy to be able to click on all these different sports that they have. Hell, do you know something about cricket? Go play some cricket, play soccer, MMA, NHL, MLB, PGA, college football, NBA, of course, and NFL. You need to be taking advantage of this right now. I'm looking at Gordon Hayward, 15.5 points. I know people had just started talking about his conditioning, but based on this Terry Rozier news, have these guys queued up. Have Gordon Hayward, have LaMelo Ball, Miles Bridges, all of these Charlotte Hornets queued up in the event you get that news, and fire on the overs. Looking at our player props tool, which is still in a free trial period, take advantage of that. Gordon Hayward over on 14.5 points is coming out with a 43% expected ROI. I know it's one extra point there, but you get no Rozier there. That becomes an auto play. So have some of those queued up. Be ready to go. I'm telling you, it is so much fun to play over at PrizePicks. I know you'll enjoy it too. Thank you so much to them for their sponsorship. And I know the guys are going to be doing a 30-minute show after lock. So from 4 to 4:30 out here on the West Coast, 7 to 7:30 if you're in a normal human time out there on the East Coast. Check out that show. Stay tuned with those guys. It's going to be Eytan and Greg taking you guys all the way past lock. So thank you so much again to PrizePicks. Let's keep it moving. Next up, we've got Philadelphia. This is a talking point, -3 at New Orleans Pelicans, 225.5 total. Pretty nice little total comparatively to some of these other garbage numbers that we have here. But of course, Ben Simmons, we're not going to have that conversation. And Shake Milton, he's going to be out as well. This sets up as Joel Embiid. Oh my goodness. I love center. I love Joel Embiid. I love Tyrese Maxey. Tobias Harris, even I think for tournaments, has a ceiling. And, the ownership has started to creep up there. He's now over 10%. But how do you kind of see this Philadelphia team going up against what should be a fantastic up-paced tempo side on the other side with New Orleans?
Yeah, I think this is one of the best teams to target, in particular Embiid. He's obviously one of the best options anyway, but gets a bump without Simmons on the floor. Last season, he played a total of, I'm reloading it now, but he played a total of 463 minutes without Ben Simmons on the floor. He averaged 1.84 DraftKings points per minute with a 43.6% usage rate. Tobias Harris was on the floor for a total of 294 minutes that Embiid played without Simmons. Embiid still averaged 1.7 DraftKings points per minute with a 41.5% usage rate. In the total games that he played without Simmons, going from memory, but I think he averaged 1.65 DraftKings points per minute. So you're just looking at, I think, one of the best best options, and it's pretty easy to get to him. Tobias Harris also benefits, though, because I expect that you'll see Harris and Embiid's minutes staggered to keep one of them on the floor for offensive reasons. So Harris is likely to average about 1.25 fantasy points per minute as well. In 717 minutes without Simmons last year, 1.2 DraftKings points per minute, 28.6% usage percentage. And, again, I expect him to be getting 16 or so minutes without Embiid on the floor. He averaged 1.12 DraftKings minutes alongside Embiid without Simmons. So they both look really good. And then Tyrese Maxey, one of the most popular value plays. He's kind of like Jaren Jackson for me in that I think he's a very good play. I think his ownership is too high relative to the alternatives, just because there are so many alternatives. It's not to say that you shouldn't play Tyrese Maxey. It's to say that I don't think, like I said earlier, I like Jalen Green more than I like Tyrese Maxey. There's some other, cheap guys you can talk about as well. Duarte at $700 less expensive is certainly an option that's lower owned. There's just a lot of really cheap guys. Jalen Suggs at 4K, he has issues of his own that I don't like about him, but still, getting like half the ownership of Tyrese Maxey. The reason that I'm a little bit lower on Maxey than the field is that I think this is a situation where it seems like Maxey's being projected to have the same level of production that he had last year overall, when he averaged about 0.9 DraftKings points per minute. The issue with that is that so many of his minutes last year came without Embiid on the floor. Now you're going to insert him into the starting lineup, playing alongside Embiid, playing alongside Harris. He goes from like a 0.93 fantasy point per minute guy down to around 0.75, give or take. That's still good production for, let's call it 30 minutes of a 4K player, but it's not the same. You can't expect him to produce at the same rate playing with the starters as you do coming off the bench. I think a good amount of his minutes are going to be with only one of those two on the floor. And the best case scenario would be if somehow they don't stagger Harris and Embiid and, they stagger Maxey Embiid instead, but that's not my expectation. So I think Maxey's a very good play. I think right now, relative to some of the other value that we've talked about, he's getting more ownership than he deserves, and the other guys are getting less.
And the boom bust tool definitely seconds that with you as well. 28.9% ownership right now, currently for him on DraftKings, 17% optimal. That is one of the most negatively leveraged plays. Chris Duarte is super negatively leveraged as well, but he's still a good play. Same thing exists for Scotty Barnes, negatively leveraged, but I would rather be on either side of those two as opposed to Tyrese Maxey, who has to contend with the ceiling of, or just the shot volume of Joel Embiid. Sure, Shake Milton being out maybe helps him a tiny bit, but what do you think about, you kind of covered everything there. Can I interest you in Tobias Harris, though?
Yeah, absolutely. 1.2 DraftKings points per minute overall without Embiid or Simmons on the floor last year. 1.12 when he's on with Embiid without Simmons, and then it obviously is higher without either of them. So Harris, I think like the only thing hurting Harris for me is that he kind of comes in at that like no man's land price point. You have Maxey as a really cheap option. You have Embiid as one of the top raw scorers. But I will say right now we have Gordon Hayward projected for 26% ownership at 7,500. We have Tobias Harris projected for 10% ownership at 7,600. I'm assuming that changes between now and lock because it makes no sense to me. But if that were to actually be the case, like I'm just jamming Tobias Harris a ton and not playing as much Hayward.
Agreed. We got news though. One interesting thing. We ended up getting Taj Gibson randomly ruled out from the New York side. Do you want to kind of react to that for me quick?
Yeah, I was trying to kind of figure it out on the fly. I gave a couple extra minutes to Mitchell Robinson. I just think that, not having his typical backup makes his minutes, if he can stay out of foul trouble, a little bit higher. I gave more minutes to Quickly. I don't think it's going to be enough for Quickly to be someone that I'm rostering in DFS. But I, gave a few extra minutes to Toppin. I had Quickly playing, 6 minutes or something. I bumped him up to like 15 or 16, just thinking that now you probably get, a little bit smaller lineups with like Toppin or Randle playing the 5 when Robinson's not on the floor. So it doesn't have any big impact in terms of DFS for me, I don't think. It just makes guys like Robinson look a little bit better.
Yeah, if it were any other front court on any other slate, I think I would probably matter, but I don't think because it's the Knicks on an 11 gamer, it's really going to matter that much. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the New Orleans side. Obviously, no Zion Williamson, no Thomas Satoransky, I guess, or no, he's questionable. All right, so Thomas Satoransky, first of all, yay, he plays for the Pelicans. Second of all, not going to be rostering him anyway, but J-Val is getting some ownership. Brandon Ingram, rightfully, he's my guy. I love this man. 7,700 for him. Maybe kind of a contrarian play up there. And Devontae Graham, now a part of this Pelicans team. Not really sure what to think about him. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, his price tag's out of control. Probably no for me. But what do you kind of see, especially from those two guys that are gaining some ownership, Jonas Valanciunas and Brandon Ingram?
Absolutely love Brandon Ingram here. He's another one that he's in that Tobias Harris range where I think he should be getting a lot of ownership. He's not right now. Like he's projected for 10%. Again, I don't know why or how he's 10%, Harris is 10%, and Hayward's getting a ton. But even that's another example, Jaren Jackson's getting all this ownership at 5,900. I think he's a good play, but I actually like Ingram a little bit more at his price tag compared to Jackson. Ingram sees a bump across the board when he plays without Zion on the floor. Last season, his rates, just skyrocketed. He averaged 1.25 DraftKings points per minute in 833 minutes without Zion on the floor, 31.5% usage rate, 26% assist percentage. I just think he looks really, really good here. I think that Valanciunas is a high upside option. He certainly fits the mold of, we said, if you're not paying up for one of those centers, you want to at least go to somebody that can get you 50 plus points. Valanciunas absolutely can do that. So he would be my second guy on the Pels behind Ingram. Devontae Graham at 5,700 is fine. I don't feel strongly one way or the other, but the priority for me is Ingram, then Valanciunas.
Anything else from this team or this game whatsoever?
No.
Okay, cool.
Satoransky's questionable. I don't think it really matters.
Yeah, I don't think it does either. Going to Orlando plus 5.5. We are going to speed. Here we go. At San Antonio, 213. Markelle Fultz out. Chuma Okeke, Michael Carter-Williams, Eytan Moore, Jonathan Isaac also all out from the Orlando side. That's a lot of bodies. We're looking at Cole Anthony, Terrence Ross, Wendell Carter Jr., Mo Bamba, Hampton, if you want to do that. But by far for me, the guy that we need to talk about first is Jalen Suggs, coming in from Gonzaga, 4K, way too low. Another one of these value pieces that just needs to be discussed. Where do you kind of value him in the priority ranking of all these amazing rookies that are overpriced?
So Suggs is someone
underpriced, excuse me.
I'm more interested in him just because his ownership projection is relatively low. I don't like him as much as guys like, Maxey or certainly not Jalen Green. There are a couple of concerns for me. One, I think you could just see a really flat Orlando rotation here. They have so many bodies still, and they're not really distinguished from each other. But the thing is too, because Orlando has this ridiculous front court that has Wendell Carter and Mo Bamba and Mo Wagner and Robin Lopez, it makes it difficult to expect the wings to play huge minutes because you assume that Terrence Ross is still going to get run. You assume Cole Anthony is going to play a good amount of minutes. You assume Hampton and Harris and Franz Wagner are all going to be in the rotation. So it just makes it tough for me to say, I could see Jalen Suggs playing 35 minutes tonight. And then also you have a 103 team total for Orlando, just a very unappealing spot in general. So I still think Suggs is underpriced at 4K. I think on a lot of slates, he would be one of the best values. Tonight, it's more so a contrarian play for me because I do think people are going to play, more Green, more Maxey, more Scotty Barnes. I think they're all also better plays, but Suggs should at least give you a little bit of an ownership discount.
Terrence Ross is 4,400 on FanDuel. Want to give him a special shout out for that lovely price tag for a guy who likes to chuck. Wendell Carter Jr., 5,300 as well over there. Power forward / center eligible. I guess that makes more sense with Mo Bamba's existence there. But then why make Mo Bamba center / power forward eligible? The world will never know. But we're just figuring out this multi-positional thing over on FanDuel. You're not playing FanDuel, I'm assuming, today, correct?
No, I didn't have time to get to that.
Look at you. You hate FanDuel with a dying passion, even though you win all the money over there when you do play over there. Just pointing it out. Anything else from Orlando?
Franz Wagner is 3K flat, small forward, power forward eligibility. So even though amongst 3K guys, I like Şengün better, I think the positioning on Wagner is more useful. But again, not somebody I think you're going to need lots of or anything. All
right. And now we go to the Spurs side, and there is some large ownership coming in on DeJounte Murray, 6,800. It's his team. Jakob Poeltl, 5K. I never get him right. So going back to forever. So whatever you want to do with him, I'll let you know. I'll tweet it out and then you'll get Jakob Poeltl right. But then Derek White, 6,100 back in this offense. Keldon Johnson, Olympic gold medalist, Keldon Johnson, 5,100. How do you kind of see the Spurs team panning out?
I think that, this game, I think is going to be an absolute dumpster fire in terms of basketball. But I do think that there's reasonable options from the Spurs. DeJounte Murray, 6,800, just someone I really like this year. I think that you don't necessarily see a bump from him without DeRozan. He didn't really get one last year, but at the very least, you can still expect him to be like a 1.1 fantasy point per minute guy. And there's still some chance that he does take a step forward offensively this year now that DeRozan's gone and, really takes over. So I think DeJounte Murray is a high upside guy. I also like him just because he's capable of racking up defensive stats, and he's going up against an Orlando team that I expect to be pretty sloppy. Just a young team that isn't really that good anyway. So I like Murray. I like Derek White for a lot of the same reasons. He's, a pretty solid per minute producer. I expect him to play in the low 30s. And Jakob Poeltl, another one of these center options where he projects well from a point per dollar standpoint. It's tough for me to go to him at that position. I will also say I kind of like, or not even kind of like, if you're talking about 5K Poeltl or $5,100 Robert Williams, I think they project similarly, but I think Williams just gives you the higher ceiling because he's just a much better point per minute producer than Poeltl is. So Poeltl's fine, but not someone I care about all that much. Keldon Johnson's another guy where potentially you could see a usage bump for him this year. He did have a 24.5% usage rate in the preseason. First, this particular slate, though, not really that necessary to get to him.
I do want to point out one thing. Derek White, 1.15 DraftKings points per minute with DeMar DeRozan off the floor last year. DeJounte Murray, 1.1. So I find that fascinating that you're getting a little bit of a discount there. It's a different year. DeJounte Murray, I think, is the better play, but just wanted to throw that out there. The Derek White, I didn't understand his ownership when I first looked at it. Running that query, I understand it a little bit more. Anything else from this game? Go ahead.
One thing to mention with White is that you do want to make, and you know this, but you want to make sure that you're taking into account the minutes he played with Murray and without DeRozan.
Yep.
He does take a hit in terms of assist percentage playing alongside Murray, as you would expect. I also think that there's a pretty good chance that their minutes are staggered, but I do think that's enough to put him a little bit behind Murray, even though I think they're both good plays.
Agreed. Let's go to my least favorite game, maybe in the history of basketball. Oklahoma City plus 12 at Utah, 221 total here. There's no injuries from OKC. I don't even know really what I want to start talking about from the Oklahoma City side. Let me pull this up. There it is. Oklahoma City. We have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Josh Giddey. They look fantastic. I'm not excited to watch this game. It's a 12 total, but those are the two guys. You obviously, I think, need to be getting to some 3,800 Josh Giddey. Another guy that a lot of people like for Rookie of the Year, maybe not so much from my angle, but Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, if you're paying up for a guard, 7,200 or playing the mid-range for a guard there, definitely kind of an interesting option. What do you see from them going up against this Utah team?
Yeah, those two are pretty much where I'm starting and finishing with this team. Josh Giddey, another just underpriced rookie, produced well in the preseason, around the fantasy point per minute. Absolutely brutal matchup for him going up against Utah, but he can contribute in a variety of ways. He can score a bit. He can make plays. So I think Giddey, 3,800 at small forward, another good value option. And then Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is, I think, underpriced in terms of his talent level, his ability to score and just do everything on the floor. Last year, a 28.8% usage rate, 31% assist percentage. I think he's a good option. He is someone I mentioned this morning that he's like the perfect candidate if you're going to use boosts in Fantasy Cruncher to set it so that not that you have to have somebody from Utah with Gilgeous-Alexander, but that it at least, bumps like Donovan Mitchell's projection 10%, Rudy Gobert's projection 10%. Because if you do get that 50 plus fantasy point game from Gilgeous-Alexander that you're hoping for, it's much less likely that this game ends up being a blowout and much more likely that the Utah guys play their full minutes.
I love that talking point. Usually when a game total has like 10 plus, I'll do like a small, like a 10, 15% bump or whatever the number might be. I'll give them a bump in Cruncher, have somebody on the other side. It's not like a game stack. I'm never talking about it in that terms, but a guy like Josh Giddey, I don't even think you need to worry about that because he's 3,800, right?
No, Josh Giddey can, he doesn't matter. Like he could potentially play in the blowout where Gilgeous-Alexander probably wouldn't. Josh Giddey can destroy a $3,800 price tag and have absolutely no impact on that game whatsoever. If Gilgeous-Alexander destroys a $7,200 price tag, then either the game is close or someone on Utah just went absolutely apeshit and still blew out, the Thunder.
All right. And I have literally nothing from the Utah side.
No, me neither. Like that's another reason I like using the boost feature there on Gilgeous-Alexander is none of these Utah guys project that well here. Certainly you could get a big game from them, but they're all priced up. I mean, Donovan Mitchell's $100 less than Towns. Rudy Gobert is 8,200. It's just not a team I'm going to be getting to outside of maybe, just matching them with some Gilgeous-Alexander.
All right, let's catch up on two super chats. That one's 89. Is Achua and Barnes in the same lineup, 2 negative EV? Not if you've got lower owned options around them.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine as long as, you're going to some low-owned guys somewhere else. But assuming the question was, are they going to cannibalize each other? The answer is no. All
right. And then Corey Randall said, am I wrong or did Derek White hurt Murray when he was on the floor? I think it was they were both like 1.1, 1.15. I'm just saying that Derek White was surprisingly better with DeRozan off the floor comparatively.
Yeah. I don't have the number in front of me, but I know White's assist percentage goes down.
All right, let's move it on. We got 2 to go here. We're going to cut in a little bit into just slightly. I mean, again, 11 games in an hour. That was always going to happen. But here we go. Denver, +6. They're underdogs going into Phoenix, 223.5. Phoenix really just went completely nuts last year. I don't know what to expect from them this year whatsoever. But Jamal Murray, he continues to be out. Dario Saric, who got hurt in those finals, continues to be out here as well. Both of them will be out here for a while. But from the Denver side, Michael Porter Jr. got paid, but I still want to play all the Nikola Jokic instead. How about you?
Yeah, and just to double back to that question for a second, 0.92 DraftKings points per minute for Derek White, 1.1 for DeJounte Murray when they were on the floor together last year. Nikola Jokic, I think, clearly one of the priorities on this slate. He sees a bump in his usage rate. He sees a bump in his assist percentage playing without Jamal Murray. There's no reason to think that goes away. His assist percentage last year was 5 to 6 points higher without Murray on the floor compared to with Murray. His assist percentage jumped 5 points. So Jokic looks great, right up there with Embiid. Slightly ahead of Towns in terms of projection, but also a little bit more expensive. Outside of him, though, I don't really see a whole lot here. You can certainly take some shots on Michael Porter's ceiling, but there's not. I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about outside.
Yeah, I don't really see it. He's under a 1.1 fantasy point per minute guy. He's a volume scorer. He's not. I think he can rebound enough to kind of get you there, but he's not free. 6,400. I get it. If you want to take a shot on that ceiling, I get it. But also, first game out, I don't know what those minutes look like. And Jokic, I don't even think gets the full allotment of minutes, but at least I know that my floor is elevated. My ceiling is absolutely there in 35, 36 minutes. So I'm right there with you. I'm glad that you don't really have a whole lot of interest anywhere else there. On the Phoenix side, this is another team that's just not super appealing to me. You can take shots on Booker's 8,200 ceiling, Chris Paul 7,600. It always seems like there's these sneaky games where he comes in 5, 6, 7% owned, or sneaky slates, and then he ends up kind of just busting off a massive game. Do you see that kind of being somebody that you might get into your portfolio tonight?
They kind of remind me of what I was saying with Minnesota outside of Towns. Booker, Paul, Ayton, Bridges, they all just look like neutral plays to me where, I'm playing 150 lineups, so I probably do get to a little bit just because they project for like 5.5 times their salary. They have decent ceilings. They're good options, but they're not great in terms of the entire slate. There's a lot of guys that I would be putting ahead of them. So it's kind of like it's just sort of like a no-brainer where Devin Booker's good, Paul's good, Ayton's good. Like, yes, you can play those guys, but there's a lot of guys that you're going to want to play at higher exposures.
All righty. I really don't have anything else to talk about in this game.
No, me neither.
All right, Sacramento. As we go to this last game, Adam and I are just flying through this, giving you all the analysis. He's done it twice now today. So hit that like button for him, if not for me. Absolutely appreciate you all being here. We have 2.5K people in the chat, 2,500 people talking basketball here at 6 o'clock on the East Coast on a Wednesday, 3 o'clock out here on the West Coast. It's incredible to be back. I love the NBA and I love the fan base we have here at Awesemo for the NBA. Appreciate you all being here. Let's talk Sacramento at Portland, +5 for Sacramento, 232.5 total. It's actually moved up to 234.5, moved up 4 points since open. But Sacramento, no injuries whatsoever you're looking at for this team. Sure, you have De'Aaron Fox with a ceiling. Harrison Barnes, 7,400. That's hilarious. Buddy Hield, 7K as well. Tyrese Halliburton. I mean, are any of these prices advantageous enough that you want to take shots on them?
No, I was pretty surprised coming into the slate because we got the news last night that Bagley's not going to be in the rotation. This game has the highest total on the slate. So it was just like, man, there's probably going to be some value from Sacramento, but they're just weirdly priced up, whereas so much of the slate is not. Davion Mitchell at 3,600 was someone I mentioned this morning is like, if in the massive field tournaments, if you're just trying to get away from some of the other 3,500, give or take guys, Mitchell has some uncertainty around him that makes him appealing, but definitely not someone I'm looking to get a lot of. De'Aaron Fox, more than happy to play him if he somehow fits into a lineup, but I would definitely rather find $400 for Karl Anthony Towns if I can. It's just a team that I think is correctly priced or overpriced for the most part, which, on some slates, just chasing that those ceilings would be really, really appealing. But on this slate, it's just like there's a lot of high upside plays that are going low owned that you can get to. There's a lot of guys that are very clearly underpriced you can get to. And then you have the Kings where it's like, yeah, they have ceilings, but they're kind of just even further off the board.
All right. And then this Portland team, I got to say, out of any team that I was researching the last 2 days, it was mind-blowing to me. And I mean, absolutely mind-blowing to see the other pieces on this roster. You have CJ McCollum, Nurkic, Lillard, Powell, Covington, but then Larry Nance Jr., Cody Zeller, Ben McLemore, Dennis Smith Jr. I mean, this team, it doesn't even make sense. I don't know what this rotation is, but they don't matter for fantasy purposes. Who does? CJ McCollum, Yusuf Nurkic, Damian Lillard. Pick one tonight.
Yeah, I think McCollum's the first one just because of his position and price. 7,200 is going to look really good for him. Nurkic, I love at 7K in this spot. It should be a high scoring game. He should have a lot of success here. The opportunity cost is what makes it a little bit more difficult to get there, but I do like Nurkic quite a bit. And then Damian Lillard, he's a very good tournament pivot away from someone like, or from any of those centers. Like if you have a build where you do use Robert Williams or you do use Nurkic or Gafford, someone like that, Damian Lillard, I think, is one of the best guys to be paying up for because he just has that unbelievably high ceiling. The median projection is fine, but the ceiling for him is just, kind of off the charts. So he's the kind of guy where if I am sacrificing Embiid or Jokic or Towns, Lillard is towards the top of my list for guys that I want to be replacing them with.
All right. Anything else from this game?
Nope.
Oh my God. Adam, any final words for the people on the way out of here? We covered it.
Nope.
Thank you so much for all your input. That's great. Sean Lewis with the super chat. Appreciate you. All of the guys on the next show coming up here right now. I'll let them address it here for you. Eytan and Greg on the NBA Live Before Lock show, plus the 30-minute bonus coverage. Thank you so much to PrizePicks. Thank you so much to Tyler behind the virtual glass. Appreciate you. He's Adam Scherer. He's fun to follow on Twitter. I'm Eric. Come follow me because I need friends. We'll see you later.
Better late than never, they say. It's live before lock, an 11-game slate, juicy here for you tonight. We appreciate you rolling with us, and we have something special for you at the top of this hour, courtesy of PrizePicks. PrizePicks is going to be with us the entire show. You see above me, take advantage of their promo code, or what we're going to do, our promo code, Awesemo, for them. We're going to match your first deposit up to $100. Greg Ehrenberg is in the house. All of your questions will be answered, and put an asterisk next to that because that isn't necessarily binding by any means. What's happening, brother? All gassed up and ready to go for tonight's pretty big slate here.
Got actual a real slate to talk about, and yesterday's slate, opening day, so 2-game slate. I generally do not like 2-game slates very much, but whenever there's been no NBA for a really long time, I always feel obligated to play just as much volume as possible on opening night, and I end up regretting it most of the time just because stupid stuff happens on 2-game slates. I'm overweight for field on Drew Holiday. He gets hurt. Patty Mills makes 100% of his 3-point attempts. I didn't think he was going to make 100% of his 3-point attempts, but I never highlight the things that actually worked out for me that I got lucky on, which was I had some exposure to Pat Connaughton, which never would have paid off had Drew Holiday not gotten hurt. But it is what it is. I got my ass kicked yesterday, and I'm looking forward to today.
Tonight's all about bouncing back. And as you mentioned, 11 games on the slate, so plenty of an opportunity here to find some value, which we will do. I'm sure, are going to have a lot of questions here with the chat. The first time in a long time that we've had a live before lock, especially as you mentioned, away from the 2-game slate last night. Tyler's in the house producing. PrizePicks.com is with us throughout. And why don't we just look at the slate in general and kind of your overall look at it? Yes, it's refreshing to no longer have to dive into and try and extrapolate constant value from just 2 games. You have 11 to look at tonight. We're back in the NBA, which is a fantastic thing in its own right, Greg. But just looking at the slate overall, what jumps out at you, especially compared to a smaller game slate?
Well, so at least in terms of doing the show yesterday, when you're doing a 2-game slate, everybody's in play, right? There's not a point where you're playing on a 2-game slate and it's like, I mean, if you're playing one lineup, obviously you have to differentiate a little bit, but when I'm playing 150 lineups on a 2-game slate, it's generally like, okay, this guy is projected to be in 50% of lineups by the field, so I want to be over or underweight to him. But ultimately, I'm kind of ending up getting some exposure a little bit everywhere. Whereas on a slate where it's 11 games, it's more so of which guys project well. I want to project the guys that play well. I don't have to play shitty plays just because they exist on the slate.
All right, let's dive into it. I see a bunch of people, including Terry, of course, our own here in the house, and he's right. The ratio of as far as people watching to that thumbs up should be much higher here. And yes, Isaiah Robinson, this is my post Ben Simmons Sixers hat, by all means. Super chat is alive and well. Let's look at that. Avi with the super chat. Can we talk about how to pivot off of Sabonis and FanDuel, but still have players in that game? I know we're going to look at position by position tonight, but it is live before lock, and people's questions, especially the super chat, Greg, are going to help dictate kind of where we go here. So Avi right away dropping some coin our way. Thank you very much for that. Any thoughts on that, specifically on FanDuel pivoting away from Sabonis but staying in that game?
So I mean, starting with Sabonis, I mean, it's not like he's a crazy popular player or anything. And also, what site? Oh, he's talking about FanDuel. So
yeah, FanDuel. Sorry.
For the FanDuel slate, I mean, Sabonis is priced at 9,700. We have a project for 13.7% ownership. I'm about even with the field on him. I mean, it's hard to say like pivot in what way, right? Because there's not a direct pivot at the power forward / center position. It's priced anywhere near him. I will say my favorite power forward play, who's on the expensive end of the pricing range on FanDuel due to recent news, is Julius Randle. Todd Gibson is out now for the Knicks. We also have Nerlens Noel is out, and that leaves the Knicks really thin in the front court. Combine that with, we know how Tom Thibodeau runs his rotations, where he just gives everybody as many minutes as they can handle. Even in the preseason games, Julius Randle was regularly playing over 30 minutes per game, which is totally unnecessary. There's no reason for that. But Thibodeau says after the games, hey, we play to win every single game, even if it's a meaningless game against backups in the preseason. So I fully expect Julius Randle to play somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 minutes today, even on opening night. And that's something that I'm not totally confident that a lot of teams are going to do, is run out their core guys as many minutes as they can handle. But the Knicks will do that. And considering the injuries the Knicks have, I really like Julius Randle at the top end of that pricing range. Power forward and center eligibility on FanDuel. So I think that would be the pivot to make. But I mean, there's not somebody you can directly pivot to at that price point on FanDuel that's in the same game.
Yeah, and that's a great point there. It's just if you're looking at matching up dollars, by all means. All right, more questions will follow. Super chat as well. Definitely not necessary, but always appreciated. We'll bump you right up and give you the best answer possible. When you look at the point guard position here, and again, hit that thumbs up. See, look at that. We ask and we receive there. Tharusa I assume, hopefully I'm not butchering that. Use code Curry to get 50% off. Had first profitable day in the NBA since the playoffs. Boom Bust is a game changer. That's a nice little segue. We are running this promo code Curry, but how about that? I'm sure you guys talked about that last night. Used that promo code Curry and made some money for the first time since the playoffs. What we're doing is working, specifically you here.
Yeah, I mean, definitely appreciate it. By the way, also, I want to bring up, appreciate all the super chats. Apparently, and we could blame this on Eric as well. So we had Sean Lewis left a super chat. Apparently, during the tail end of last show, Eric did not answer it because he was not fulfilling his duties as a host of the show.
Second.
But I'm scrolling back to find the super chat.
Major violation. Yes. I mean, you're already 8 minutes into the second show. You might as well puncture. You know what? Eric made a business decision, right? You hear about that a lot of times, guys missing a tackle. Eric made a business decision because if he went any longer, his co-host would have just bailed. So maybe that's why you didn't answer Sean.
Yeah, I think he just wasn't aware because that happened to him yesterday also on his doing show. He missed some super chats and he tried to say, oh, he saw it, but he just didn't get to it. He just didn't see it. And he was making excuses. But Sean Lewis is super chat.
Do you see it?
I found it. I scrolled back and found it. He said, go Achua to get away from Barnes ownership for leverage. Is it okay to play both in cash? All right, so let me sort through the Toronto Raptors and see what I have going on here. In terms of cash games, you should absolutely be playing Scotty Barnes over on DraftKings. He's one of the best overall value plays on the slate, only 3,400. We did get the Raptors starting lineup. He's confirmed starting. We also have Goran Dragic starting at power forward. As for Precious Achua, at 3,100, I think he's a viable cash play. I don't think you absolutely have to play him in cash games. But also in terms of ownership, it's not like there's a crazy gap between Achua and Barnes. Both of them are fairly popular. So I don't think that there's really any direct kind of great leverage by playing Achua over Scotty Barnes. I personally have more exposure to Barnes today. I'm a little bit underweight to Precious Achua. He's in my player pool, but I only have around 10% exposure to him. The field's at 16% right now.
All right, let's jump in and start bouncing around here. We can start at the point guard spot by all means and dabble into FanDuel as well, but really focusing here on the DK slate from the point guard spot, looking at the top and then trying to find some value, even if there's a contrarian play that you like. Let's start there at the top. Pretty high price guys. Obviously, Damian Lillard right there at the top, the only guy that's 10K plus. You also have Donovan Mitchell, who's a little bit more flexible into that 2 spot. De'Aaron Fox, who we have projected really high. Who are you getting, you think, on top of this list, the most exposure to tonight?
So you're talking about expensive point guards?
Yes, just like top level point guards that are either going to be there to pay off or because of their price.
So in general, and also this is going to be different FanDuel versus DraftKings, and it's also a little weird now that we have multi-positional eligibility on both sites. But I went cheap at a lot of my guard spots today. In terms of a pay-up option, I do have a lot of exposure to LaMelo Ball right now, and the reason is twofold. First of all, I think that he's a little bit underpriced to start the season. $7,600 on FanDuel, $7,700 on DraftKings. I fully expect him to take a step forward off his great rookie year and be in the all-star mix this year. And then also we have Terry Rozier's questionable to play. I am currently assuming that Terry Rozier is not going to play. That's something we're going to need updates on during the show, and we're going to get it from the news guy on Negro Loco. We post all the updates in what is now our Discord channel. We used to be Slack, now Discord.
That's right. You have to sign up.
Trying to acclimate myself to that because I'm old and I'm set in my ways. But I'm in the Discord. If you guys have questions, you're in the premium Discord chat, definitely at me on it. I'll answer them. But as for LaMelo Ball, once again, I'm assuming that Terry Rozier is out. If he is out, if that is the case, there's going to be a lot of ball handling responsibility going to LaMelo Ball. Also consider Devontae Graham is no longer on Charlotte this year. So all that considered, Ball is currently my favorite pay-up option point guard.
All right, so as far as anybody really above from a cost standpoint, you're staying away for the most part. Now, look, mass lineups, that's different. But just as far as paying up for anybody, is there anyone at all that you have looked at? Or is this pretty much position where Ball is your ceiling for price?
I mean, there's other expensive players I'm getting to a little bit. But in terms of priority options, there's nobody I'm getting to a ton of exposure to as a pay-up option at point guard. outside of LaMelo Ball. Like, I have some exposure to Fred VanVleet. I don't know if he really qualifies as a pay-up option, though. I have De'Aaron Fox is in around a 10% of my lineups over on DK. On FanDuel, De'Aaron Fox becomes a little bit more of a priority option, but once again, he's 8,500. I don't know if that really qualifies what we're talking about in terms of a pay-up spot, but I'm a little bit.
Well, anybody higher than Ball, I guess, would be fair.
Okay.
If you're paying up.
Yeah, so De'Aaron Fox.
So VanVleet, I think, counts.
Okay, yeah. So Fred VanVleet, I have some exposure to, not a significant amount. Over on FanDuel, though, I am overweight to De'Aaron Fox. I think that the matchup for him against Portland Trailblazers, very favorable one for all the situation with Damian Lillard, as good as he is as an offensive player. All the rumors about him in the offseason, totally false about him not wanting to be in Portland anymore. He's committed to them verbally a million times that he wants to play his entire career out in Portland with the Blazers. I expect that to be the case, but he's not a good defensive player. And Portland Trailblazers have had one of the worst defenses in the NBA for a little bit of time here defending point guards. And the main reason just because Damian Lillard is not a good individual defensive player. So I do like the individual matchup that De'Aaron Fox has here. And the ownership for him right now, right around 20% on FanDuel. That's something I'm overweight to. Also, I saw that Larry C in the chat said that we did get an ownership update. So I'm going to refresh to make sure that I'm looking at the most recent numbers here. But let's see. So De'Aaron Fox currently now on FanDuel is projected for so DraftKings is projected for 6% ownership. It's a little more expensive, 23% ownership on FanDuel. So it's gone up a little bit, but not to any sort of problematic number.
What about paying down and just for low cost guys, even if it's a punt option? And I'll give you one example. I'm looking at Maxey, where you clearly understand the situation at the point guard spot for the Sixers is just non-existent right now. So from a volume standpoint alone, and that matchup against the Pelicans, I can count on Maxey getting some minutes here. Again, he's 4K for a reason on DraftKings, but I'm curious if you've looked at anybody kind of in that lower cost range where you could really benefit, even if it's from a volume standpoint of minutes.
Yeah, so Maxey is the chalk of the slate over on FanDuel. He's currently projected for 29% ownership. On DraftKings, he's projected for actually 23% ownership. That's come down quite a bit in the most recent run.
Wow.
Earlier in the day, I think we had Maxey projected well over 30% ownership. So that's a pretty big change, actually, this most recent run, because I actually thought that Maxey early in the day was going a little bit over-owned, and there were some other cheap plays like Jalen Green that I really like pivoting to. I like Josh Giddey a lot. There's a lot of rookies I think make for good plays right out of the bat, right out of the gate, which we don't usually see from NBA DFS, but right away, I mean, Jalen Green, Scotty Barnes, Josh Giddey, I think all make for really strong DFS options, Evan Mobley being another one. So I was kind of looking to pivot off of Tyrese Maxey a little bit, but I'm going to have to up my exposure to him now that he's only 23%. I thought he was going to be a guy who's going to be 30 to 40% owned. It looks like it's no longer going to be the case. So to me, I think Tyrese Maxey is somebody who you absolutely want to be playing in cash games and tournaments now. I'm going to want to be overweight to the field on him.
You mentioned the rookies. Anybody else as far as this position that is worth a nod? I got a couple in the chat that we can hit, but I'm just curious, including super chat here, but is there anybody else? I saw John Wick ask about Murray. Is there anybody else that maybe has gone unmentioned or worth a nod, at least when it comes to this slate?
Well, I mean, I mentioned Jalen Green, but I could go into more detail with Jalen Green. I really like him as a prospect. He skipped college. He ended up going into the G League, and that's something that I would like to see more players do. I think it's a really good developmental process. They get paid a little bit more money. They're able to make money in college now, but they can make actual real money in the G League, and I really like that as an avenue for players to take in terms of maximizing their earning potential. But Jalen Green, maybe because he didn't play in college, he's somebody who just the general public doesn't really know his name, but crazy good athlete. He's playing on a Houston Rockets team. They're going to be terrible this year. Their defense is going to suck. I expect them to play at a pretty fast pace. But also, Jalen Green, I think, is going to play as many minutes as he can handle right out of the gate. I expect him to be in the starting lineup for them. And, well, we've gotten their starting lineup confirmed. He is starting for them. But also, he profiles as a guy who's going to be a really high usage player in the NBA. We saw in his preseason games, he was not afraid to take shots, even when he wasn't making them. So the 4 preseason games that we saw from Jalen Green, he went 4 of 14 from the field, 6 of 15, 2 of 6, and 4 of 12. So efficiency could certainly be an issue for him. But when he's this cheap on DraftKings at a 4,200 price point, and he's willing to chuck the ball basically whenever he's touching it, I think that's a really favorable looking situation. So he's overall my favorite value play on the slate.
Yeah, and then just a bunch of other ones. They're moving rapidly here. So if you get something out, as far as a start sit or just something specific, we can definitely hit that. I did see Blake Staley mention Hornets line moving as if Rozier not playing, adjust accordingly. So we'll wait for the news god to make it official here. As also, now there were a couple of Randle, Jalen Green, Sabonis, Maxey. That was Cliff in the question there. A couple from Jalen Green, as you just laid out. So maybe we just look at Green pitting up against Randle and then also Bane.
Yeah. In terms of, so you just threw out some names there. Who are you? I know you said Desmond Bane. Who are the other players you said?
Yep. Julius Randle and then also Tyrese Maxey. So 3 separate people asking questions about Jalen Green. Maybe you're onto something there. All questions with different players, and that's Maxey, Randle, and Bane.
I'm still not even sure what question you're like. I'm still just comment on those players is the question.
No, they're asking for their lineup, like going into their lineup. Who would you prefer over those two? Each one being a pair. That's all.
That's
fine.
Maxey, Randle.
No, it's these are 3 different start sits with Jalen Green involved in all of them. So since you just laid out Green, I hit you with all of them as far as the names of them. But that's fine. It was too much. So it was basically Jalen Green over Maxey. The second question was Green over Randle. The third question was Green over Bane. Does that make sense?
No, it does not. It does not make sense at all. I don't. And Jalen Green's in all 3 of them, and somebody's comparing him to Julius Randle.
Yes. Okay, that's fine.
I have Julius Randle projected for a lot more fantasy points than Jalen Green. He also costs about twice as much. But that aside, I'm gonna answer some questions that are in our premium Discord chat here that I can actually see the question. That makes it easier for me to answer when I can read the question as I see it. From Willie Perch here is asking, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or DeJounte Murray, who do I have more exposure to? For me personally, I have more exposure to SGA today. I'm a little concerned about SGA today, just from a standpoint of I think there's a pretty good chance the Thunder just get destroyed by the Jazz today, and the starters don't close the fourth quarter. So some people have brought up Josh Giddey also, and I really like Giddey. He's one of the rookies I mentioned that I think makes for a really good play on this slate. And one of the things I really like about Giddey is, number one, I expect him to start for the Thunder. But then number 2 also is, even if this is a situation where the Thunder get blown out by the Jazz, I still expect Giddey to be playing in garbage time. He's somebody who projects as a really good fantasy producer just from his ability to rebound the ball, pass the ball, and score. So I think he's going to be able to deliver in a bunch of different stat categories to pad his fantasy stats. So that's something I really like about Josh Giddey in this spot. I do right now have a little bit more exposure to SGA than Derek White, just to answer that question, but neither one of them are really core plays for me at their price points.
All right, so let's look at the 2 here, the shooting guard spot. And again, a little flexibility, as we know we can have with guys who can rotate in a couple of different positions. Anybody at the top as far as price point, or are you still looking at paying down a little bit here? Rozier looks like is out tonight. Thanks, Tyler.
All right. So did we get, let's see if we have a starting lineup that that our guy, the news god, posted, which we don't have a starting lineup yet, but here we have this message posted in our premium Discord chat that Terry Rozier has been downgraded to out for tonight's game. So that is going to be pretty important news that I think that we should be covering for sure. But then something else also, with now there being multi-positional eligibility on both DraftKings and FanDuel, almost all the guys that we just talked about at point guard also have shooting guard eligibility. So it's a lot of players who we're talking about in the same vein. One guy that is not a point guard, but is a shooting guard, I think makes for a really good value play. Another young value play is Chris Duarte, who is the first-round pick for the Indiana Pacers this year. He starts the year at only $3,300 on DraftKings, so he's somebody who's making it into a lot of my lineups. Over on FanDuel, where he's $4,500, that's a little bit more of a reasonable price point. He's also only small forward eligible on FanDuel, but at least on DraftKings at the near minimum salary, he's somebody that becomes a pretty high priority play for me.
All right, so let's look at Rozier kind of from the standpoint of Charlotte, and if there's any instant pivot in game here versus anything else on the slate for that position. So what are you immediately looking at with no Rozier for the Hornets?
Yeah, so the first thing is just LaMelo Ball. I expect the ball to be in his hands more, which is going to mean a higher assist rate for him. It's also going to mean more shot attempts, more usage. I think there's a chance he plays 1 or 2 extra minutes. So LaMelo Ball, who, like I said before, I was already assuming that Terry Rozier was not going to be playing tonight. But now we get to a situation where it's just, hey, confirmed what I thought is going to be true. LaMelo Ball is my favorite pay-up option at the point guard spot, and he's somebody who I think people should have in their cash games and both FanDuel and DraftKings. Really strong play. As for cheaper options, I don't think there's anybody like an Ish Smith who moves into the starting lineup. I'm kind of looking through their depth chart.
What about like a book night I saw mentioned on the chat? Oubre, you're still paying for a little bit.
Well, but I'm trying to figure out who's going to start, and I think it's going to be Kelly Oubre. I think they're going to go the starting lineup of, and once again, we don't have this yet, so I'm just guessing and trying to figure out where I want to allocate minutes to. But I'm going
probably him over book night, though. You wouldn't have to worry about that, right? So that's a 5,600. We have Oubre at DK.
I'm not exactly sure his price point is at the top of my head. I'm just trying to figure out.
No, I'm telling you, like I'm looking at it here, 5,600. Yep.
So in terms of starting lineup, I'm going to assume it's going to be LaMelo Ball, Kelly Oubre, Gordon Hayward, Miles Bridges, and Mason Plumlee. And, Kelly Oubre is a guy who should be right around a fantasy point per minute. If we assume that he starts and plays 30 to 32 minutes, that's going to mean a projection of a little over 30 fantasy points, which at that price point definitely puts him in play. He's not somebody who I'm going to get a ton of, but I'm going to update my my lineups now for this news. But I assume that means I get to him 5 to 10% of lineups or so.
Yeah, there's nobody else. I mean, I saw there was a super chat about Hayward specifically, but if it's
what's the what's the Hayward super chat?
Well, it was just about his health and about him damaging the Pacers when he's healthy, but just in the backdrop of Rozier being out, if that impacts volume and just minutes and productivity, then you have that.
I think here's another way to address the super chat we got from Abby Schreier. Is that is Gordon Hayward 100%? It's the first game of the season. I assume that everybody's as close to 100% as possible. Since joining the Celtics, he smokes Indiana every time. Well, he's not on the Celtics, but that aside, I guess I think he meant back to the, or maybe dating back to when he was on the Celtics. But that aside. The real issue I have with Gordon Hayward here is that apparently he's going to be on a light minutes restriction today, or they're at least going to be monitoring his minutes. I'm going to pull up the tweet so I get the exact information, but Gordon Hayward has not played basketball in a considerable amount of time. He didn't play preseason games. He didn't play in the towards the tail end of last season. So with that in mind, here is the tweet that News got it posted earlier in the day about Gordon Hayward. James Borrego, Hornets coach, said the rotation will be 9 to 10 players deep tonight. He added that Gordon Hayward isn't on a minutes restriction, but they will monitor his conditioning as the game goes on and plays it by ear. He said that Gordon Hayward has not played significant NBA minutes in 6 months. So with that in mind, I don't think we're going to see 35, 36 minutes from Gordon Hayward. I think it's a little more reasonable to see kind of what we got out of Andrew Wiggins and Draymond Green last night. So, expectation of somewhere in the neighborhood of 28 to 30 minutes for Gordon Hayward. It makes him somebody who's a pretty weak option for me, at least on DraftKings. FanDuel, because he's only 7K, I think that it makes him a low priority play. You can get into some lineups, you don't have to outright fade him. But once again, somebody who is not going to be a priority play for me. And in the last run of ownership, it's actually gone down a lot. We had Gordon Hayward projected to be crazy popular earlier days, particularly 50% ownership. But now he's only
earlier today or recently?
Earlier today. Now he's projected for 3% ownership, which is a vastly different situation. But once again, with the minutes restriction going to Gordon Hayward, it's hard to really consider him as an option to put a lot of money on.
There are only 2 guys higher cost than him tonight on the slate at DK, and that's Ingram and Brown. So even still, you're paying $7,500 for all of that risk. I don't even see what the reward would be from there. Speaking of which, are you looking at anybody else high price? Brandon Ingram, mentioned the Sixers. They lose their best and arguably one of not the best defenders on the wing and perimeter, and Ben Simmons might be some opportunity to justify paying up for Brandon Ingram on the slate tonight?
So I'm not really getting to Brandon Ingram very much. He's somebody who, if you look at the overall context of this slate, I think there are a lot of cheaper forward options to get to today. We talked about Scotty Barnes before, Desmond Bane being another guy who's really cheap. Josh Giddey, who has small forward eligibility, I think he makes for a really strong play on DraftKings. So I don't really see a need to spend up all that much at the small forward position. I have some exposure to Anthony Edwards because I think there's a good chance that he takes a step forward this year, a la what I was also expecting from LaMelo Ball. At power forward position, I like paying up for Julius Randle, who I mentioned before. He's somebody who can get into the forward spot over on DraftKings. But in terms of those other options, you mentioned Jaylen Brown as a pay up option. A little concerned with him. He's coming back from COVID. He was questionable to play. He's reportedly been dealing with some issues with his breathing, and there could be some kind of light restrictions on his minutes just based on that information. So Jaylen Brown, Brandon Ingram, neither of them are really priority plays for me.
Are you looking at anybody kind of in that mid-range before we get to the bottom part where maybe there's some 4K or lesser value there? Anybody in that mid-range, that 5 to 6K range? RJ Barrett, maybe with some minutes that, coming his way. You mentioned Taj out and that pouring on to Julius Randle. Don't know if there's any maneuverability there, kind of in that range. Mentioned Oubre as well with the Terry Rozier news. So somewhere kind of in that range, I would think to look at.
I'm looking through my small forward exposure and see what's the salary.
5,100.
Anunoby is 6,100. I'm also
you can slide him in there. That's fine. There's no hard number either way.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to answer it relative to the pricing restrictions you've given me, right? This is a salary cap game. It's a salary cap game.
You're a numbers guy. I can appreciate that.
Yeah, Anunoby would be the closest one there. But in general, I mean, there's a lot of cheap guys that I really like getting to with this small forward position on DraftKings. So I didn't really see a need to spend up there all that much.
Well, okay. Outside of, I know you mentioned a couple of younger players, even from the rookie element, but anybody else that was worthy of mentioning here as we kind of move on?
Let's see. Is there anybody who? And I'm rerunning my lineups right now, so I'll get an idea of what my exposure looks like after the Terry Rozier news, because that is, I assume, going to change some of my lineups. Like, we're getting to a lot more of LaMelo Ball now. I was already getting to a lot of LaMelo Ball, but let's see if Kelly Oubre is popping up for me now. No, not really. So, I mean, since I was already assuming he was going to be out, this didn't really change all that much for me, other than I gave a little bit of extra minutes to Kelly Oubre. But no, I think small forward's a position you generally want to go cheap at. Josh Giddey, OG Anunoby in the mid range if you need to play somebody there. Desmond Bane, I think, makes for a really good option on the cheaper end of the pricing range. He's only 3,200 on DK, and I expect that he's going to play pretty good minutes to open up the season. But yeah, I'm pretty concentrated at small forward.
All right. Super chat from Avi as far as backup minutes running the point on Philly. Shake Milton is out tonight, so take that as it was. I mean, technically on the depth chart, Maxey's the only actual point guard who is healthy playing tonight. So as far as backup minutes are concerned, I imagine this is going to be an Isaiah Joe opportunity more so than maybe anybody else.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Maxey can play a ton of minutes today.
That's what I'm telling you, man. Doc loves him too.
Yeah, I mean, he was willing to play him in big playoff moments. Seth Curry, I think we'll get some run at point guard. And like you said, Isaiah Joe will probably be the guy off the bench, but not enough to make him viable for DFS. Like, I don't think we're going to see 26, 28 minutes of Isaiah Joe. So to me, I still think Maxey is the guy to go to here. I wouldn't look to pivot off of him with Isaiah Joe or anything. I understand some of the logic there where you might say, like, hey, Maxey's going to be popular. Who's the backup? Maybe it's not going to be Maxey, ends up getting the bulk of the minutes. But to me, it's still going to be Maxey. And like we said before, in the latest run of ownership, Maxey's become much less popular, at least per our ownership projection. So it's not like there's any kind of real problematic amount of ownership going to him. We only have him at 22.9%.
Right. So looking at everything that you've kind of laid out as far as your cost allocation for backcourt and even the wing here, moving into the four, where's the majority of your exposure right now coming in at the power forward spot?
Julius Randle. Now that we have that Knicks news that we talked about right at the top of the show, where there's going to be no Nerlens Noel, there's going to be no Taj Gibson for the Knicks. I think we could really see a lot of minutes in the front court go to Mitchell Robinson, pending foul trouble. Mitchell Robinson could pick up 3 fouls in the first 4 minutes of the game, and then he's in foul difficulty, and they have to pull him back a little bit. But that aside, like Julius Randle, we saw constantly throughout the year, to the point where it got to the playoffs and Julius Randle sucked because he was totally gassed and no energy left. And it just, Thibodeau doesn't care. He's going to play his starters into the ground during the regular season. He doesn't really think long term, doesn't really think it in terms of what this is going to mean for the end of the year. Regular season, I expect these guys to play as many minutes as possible, with the main evidence being, if you look at the preseason games for the Knicks, last 2 preseason games, Julius Randle played 33 and 35 minutes. That is a crazy workload for the preseason. You have to assume he's only going to see his minutes go up now that we're in the regular season. So it's not crazy to think we see 40-plus minutes from Julius Randle to open up the season. He's a very high priority.
What about on the flip side in the same game? You mentioned the concern with Jaylen Brown coming off COVID. Jason Tatum, they lose their backcourts on the Knicks actually tonight. Clearly, from a volume standpoint, just for Boston to stay in that game, Jason Tatum's going to have to show up and then some. Yes, he's a little bit higher of a cost on DK, 9,400 to Randle's 8,800. Do you like getting to Tatum as even as much or a little bit less as Randle?
No, I much prefer Randle. Randle is my most rostered power forward.
But you're out on Tatum as a whole, or is it just in comparison to Randle?
No, just in comparison to Randle. I have 14% exposure to Jason Tatum, but Randle's like a core play for me tonight with the Knicks injury situation.
Anybody that you're looking at as far as a cheaper option at that spot to kind of pivot away from Randle?
No, Randle's my most exposed player at the position, so I'm not really looking to pivot off of him. Randle to me is the guy at the position. It's not like he's popular. We currently have Julius Randle projected for 15% ownership on DraftKings. He's projected for 16% ownership on FanDuel. So it's not like this is some guy who's 30 to 40% owned by the field that I'm trying to lower exposure to. Like, this is one of the guys who I'm saying is going under on that I want to be overweight to. I'm not looking to pivot off of him.
No, that's fair as far as your personal lineup, but as far as anybody else that you like as plays, because it's not just 100%, right? So looking at other guys that you have high exposure to, or just any relative exposure to at that spot, who would jump out?
In terms of high price power forwards,
or just in general, the position in general, it doesn't have to be high price.
So moving down, Scotty Barnes, again, he also has power forward position, power forward eligibility. We haven't talked about Jaren Jackson Jr., who is $5,900 on DraftKings, and he is $7,000 on FanDuel. 7,000 price points, a little steep on FanDuel, although he also gets the benefit of the blocks and steals being worth 3 points instead of 2 points. He's somebody in the past we've seen be able to rack up defensive numbers pretty quickly. But Jaren Jackson Jr. at 5,900 price point, he's going to be popular today, and it's a little annoying, some of the previous results for Jaren Jackson as a chalk play, where he's found ways to just fail a lot in these spots, whether it be foul trouble or getting injured. But I'm very high on Jaren Jackson Jr. this year. I had him ranked inside my top 40 when I did my best ball rankings and did my best ball drafts for DraftKings this year. He's one of my favorite breakout candidates for this year. So with that in mind, I'm going to be looking to ride him to open the season. I think that he's way underpriced, and I think he has potential to beat somebody who's regularly priced around the 8K mark or something like that later on in the year, because he was one of my favorite prospects in that draft when it included Luka Doncic, Trae Young, DeAndre Ayton. I wouldn't do this way now, but at the time, I thought that Jaren Jackson should have been the number 2 pick in that draft behind Luka Doncic. But he's always somebody I've been really high on, and I haven't really seen much reason to change that. He's had some injury issues, but he's healthy right now.
All right, see the super chat from Soul Dope. Going to get to that in a second, asking about PrizePicks. And a reminder here, in about 16 minutes, we're going to hang out for another half hour or so and build you a winning PrizePicks lineup that you can take home some money. So that's the whole point of it. Speaking of which, you see it above us. Take advantage of our promo code Awesemo and we're going to match your first deposit up to $100. No sharks, optimizers, none of the mass entries that you have to worry about. All 5-player lineups can net up to 10 times your entry fee. So just use all the knowledge you can across multiple sports, which is the beauty of it. Cross sport entries, doesn't matter what the sport is available to you on PrizePicks. You can build a ticket with it, download it where you can get it, the App Store, Google Play, where have you, or just go to prizepicks.com and use our promo code Awesemo, and we're going to match your first deposit up to $100. So we're going to hit those coming up at the top of the hour. Soul Dope 1234 on the super chat on FanDuel. Scotty Barnes, who you've been high on, talking a lot about, versus Kuz.
I prefer. Let me check the price points and whatnot between the two of them. I know I have more exposure to Scotty Barnes today, but he's 5,200. Kuzma is actually cheaper, 4,700. But even so, I'm getting some more of Scotty Barnes today. I have him with quite a bit of a higher projection. We did get news that Kyle Kuzma is going to be starting for the Wizards today, but that aside, I still like Scotty Barnes. I think he has potential to put up a lot of defensive numbers for the Raptors this year. Kyle Kuzma stepping into Washington, there is opportunity to pick up some of the usage left behind by Russell Westbrook. But even so, I still think we're going to see a lot of that be picked up by Spencer Dinwiddie this year, and then obviously Bradley Beal in the mix also. So Kyle Kuzma, I'm a little lower on him for fantasy purposes, at least as of now, heading into the season, than a lot of other people are. He's not an outright fade for me, but I'm underweight to the field on Kuzma.
Saw a lot of question. I don't know if it would be love or just question about Obi Toppin in the chat. Terry McBride in there does think Obi gets some run. Tibbs has been into him. Plus, they're down Taj now. Defer to whatever Alex has in his minutes projected. But just looking at Obi and maybe others in that price range of, 4K or below, is he somebody that you may have some exposure to as far as a cheaper option when building some lineups?
Not for me. And I understand the logic there, mostly being the same reason I like guys like Julius Randle and Mitchell Robinson today, because of the Knicks injury situation. Obi Toppin absolutely could step into that, into some of those minutes, particularly if Mitchell Robinson gets into foul trouble. There is definitely an avenue for him to play extended minutes. The thing with me, though, is there are so many young, cheap players that I like on this slate that's kind of prohibiting me from getting to him, just because there's so many other guys I prefer. And at a certain point, I just can't play everybody. So I understand the logic there. He just didn't quite make the cut for me.
McDaniels, Bertans, guys like that jump out at all? I mean, we have them projected pretty decent tonight at that position, especially for the price point, but I don't know if you're getting to them.
McDaniels, I am as of right now, although I don't think we've gotten a starting lineup for
I don't think so yet for that
for Minnesota. So I'm assuming that he is starting. I currently have the starting lineup as Jaden McDaniels and Karl-Anthony Towns in the front court, but I'm not 100% certain that Jaden McDaniels is going to be starting. So he's somebody who on FanDuel right now is in about 15% of my lineups, but that's something where if he doesn't end up starting, he's probably going to fall out of my player pool entirely. But so something just to keep an eye on. Once again, in our premium Discord chat, we're going to have news guy who's going to be posting any kind of lineups and injury information we get as the night goes on. But as for right now, I'm assuming he starts. He's in my player pool, but that is subject to change when that lineup comes out.
Yeah, the only thing I saw updated as of now was Frank Jackson starting for Detroit.
Yeah,
with Cunningham out, super cheap. I don't know if that does anything to you with that news coming in.
No, I was expecting him to start, and he's not the best fantasy producer in the world. And then also you just look at all of the other cheap guards that we've talked about already today, whether it be Josh Giddey, Tyrese Maxey. These are all guys we could also be rostering for a really cheap price point that I think have considerably more upside.
Paying up for Joel Embiid at the 5 spot?
1 sec. Rerunning my lineups again. I mean, the short answer is yes, I have exposure to Joel Embiid, but my most rostered expensive center is Karl-Anthony Towns, who I think it's kind of easy to forget how good of a fantasy producer Karl-Anthony Towns has been in previous years. But I think with Karl Anthony Towns, he's somebody who was one of the best and most consistent fantasy producers for a really long time as an expensive center option. And he kind of took a little bit of a step back in the last couple of years. One year, well, the Wolves have sucked both those years, but also he dealt with a wrist injury in one of those years, missed a lot of time. And also, there was the COVID situation where his mom died. I think he ended up having like 6 or 7 family members died. And it's kind of hard to know, like, how do we factor that into any kind of fantasy projection or anything like that? But just from a human standpoint, I think we have to assume that it's some sort of impact on his mentality last year. I expect him to come back and have a really big year this year. I think he could potentially be an all-NBA player. I think he could potentially end up being that same kind of guy he was a couple years ago, where he was viewed as one of the overall premier young players in the NBA. He had some stuff that kind of got him off track, but I think this year he's going to be the guy at the center position behind Nikola Jokic. I think Jokic should be the number 1 overall top fantasy producer at the position, and actually have Towns second ahead of Joel Embiid for the season.
Yeah, I don't hate that. I think, though, about the human element to it, Joel Embiid is so frustrated right now that it's kind of just circumstantial that it happens to be a Zion-less Pelicans team in front of him. But night in and night out, looking at his cost and the expectation of him being the top producer at the 5 spot, it is going to be, I think, less or more of an ask from doing it with Karl Anthony Towns. The reason, though, tonight, at least, the difference is nearly $1,000. I mean, talking about $900 for getting most likely that same result. But I am curious, just because tonight is that first game where Joel Embiid is just shoveling off all that shit from this past. Now, not nearly as bad as what Karl Anthony Towns. I'm not equating the two. I'm just saying if there was ever anybody else tonight who would be dealing or maybe fueled by a narrative, it would be Embiid with what's happened with Simmons.
Yeah, and then I know you're a Philly guy. You cover a lot of Philly radio, and also I saw somebody say that the lineup is out for the Timberwolves. I haven't seen a Timberwolves lineup.
I haven't seen it confirmed.
Let's see.
Houston's yes.
No, Minnesota.
No, that's what I'm saying. Houston's yes, Minnesota no.
Yeah. So once again, I assume that McDaniels is going to be starting, but I haven't seen it officially that's going to be the starting lineup. But what do you think is going to happen here with the 76ers, and how do you think this will impact Joel Embiid from a fantasy perspective this year, since you're a Philly guy?
Well, I think, and I was talking to Luffy about this earlier, I think what's happening now is that there'll be a lot more spacing for shooters around Embiid, and it's going to help the team itself. I think they've lost something clearly with Ben Simmons defensively until they can replace him with whatever they get back. So I think they're worse off defensively, and that doesn't necessarily transfer into better numbers for Embiid. I just think the team is worse off defensively. But offensively, I think from a points and an assist standpoint, Joel Embiid's numbers should actually go up, especially from a passing standpoint, because there are going to be some guys that are wide open who can knock down shots on the floor there and not have to worry about Simmons and kind of just the defense lagging or clogging. So it's something to keep an eye about, especially for Embiid. As you know, he can pass. He's definitely a talented passer. I think that there's going to be even more opportunity in that specific area, but scoring as well. Really, it's him and Harris, and then a combination of other guys kind of piecing it together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something there that you have to think about when Ben Simmons is off the court. It's not necessarily because it's not like he was a super high usage player, even though he's a star. There's also just that, hey, there's going to be more floor spacing involved in the offense now that he isn't there. And I certainly think that Joel Embiid for today, I wouldn't be surprised if he breaks the slate. But for me, I just have Karl Anthony Towns projected a little bit higher. I'm really bullish on him entering the year, and it's an 11-game slate. And there's a certain point where we're kind of making decisions on which players we want to get more of. And I have a lean towards Cat for today.
I like it, honestly. It's no homer, if I can get that out there correctly in me by any means, man. I think that you're on to something, especially saving some money. I did see on the chat, is it, Jokic or Embiid? Between the two, who would you choose?
Between Jokic and Embiid, it is, I mean, I have Jokic projected for, more fantasy points, but it's also a price point where, like, I'm not getting to a ton of Embiid either. Like I said, paying up for a center, I prefer Karl Anthony Towns for the slightly cheaper price point. So not really a direct question, but you said Embiid versus Jokic, correct?
Yes. I mean, they're pretty much separated by $200.
Okay, so to me, it's none of the above. And the answer is Karl Anthony Towns, but it would be Jokic if you're choosing between Jokic and Embiid. It's Jokic.
Okay, I'm just taking that directly from the chat. All right, anybody beyond or maybe even below? I know you mentioned as far as Karl Anthony Towns, the name that you love the most, the highest exposure to at 9,700. Anybody below, maybe in that lesser range, a Christian Wood at 8K, or if you wanted to just open this thing up to somebody kind of in a lower punt area that you could pay down, that you have exposure to, of course, at the spot.
Yeah. So for me, it's Mitchell Robinson. We talked about it's the same deal with the reason that people are asking about Obi Toppin, same reason that I like Julius Randle before. With all of the Knicks injuries that they have, or I don't know if it's necessarily injuries, but without Taj Gibson or without Nerlens Noel there, I think that we're going to see Mitchell Robinson, as long as he can avoid foul trouble, which is a pretty big if for Mitchell Robinson because he's very prone to foul trouble. I think that he could play a massive role for the Knicks today. And if you look at him right now in terms of our projected ownership, I'm going to refresh to make sure this is still accurate, but he was only projected for 1% ownership, at least in the last run. And now 0.5% projected ownership for him on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's projected for 2.9% ownership. That's a very low number for a guy who has significant defensive stat upside, particularly on FanDuel, only 5,200. Not at all surprising if we were to see him, block 4 or 5 shots. So Mitchell Robinson, somebody who I'm looking to be overweight to the field on, is a value option.
All right, final couple of minutes here, and then we'll get into our extended version, courtesy of PrizePicks, of course, PrizePicks.com. Use our promo code Awesemo atop there. We'll match your first deposit up to $100. Also want to tell you about the weekly pass here that we have. It's the Awesemo Plus NBA Express weekly pass. It's just $4.95, and it's really the best way to introduce yourself to everything Awesemo Plus NBA. You'll get the NFL DFS player and ownership rankings as well on top of that. But try it out, Awesemo Plus NBA Express, and you can get it for $4.95 a week. All right, as far as anybody else left on there that you're getting exposure to, maybe third or fourth on your list of exposure at the center before we kind of wind down, I did want to kind of re-hit on the Rozier news because that was kind of the big thing that came out earlier in the show. So for people that may have missed that, your thoughts on it. But just wrapping up the center position at all, anybody that is worthy of a mention before we kind of hit back on Rozier.
Yeah, and it's something that I saw people bring up in the YouTube chat before as I was scrolling through. But Robert Williams, without Al Horford in the mix to open up the season for the Boston Celtics. So Al Horford's going to be out today. And long-term this season, I'm a little concerned about how the Celtics are going to manage the center minutes between Horford and Robert Williams. Yep. But at least for today, with Horford not in the mix, we don't have to worry about it. Robert Williams is one of the better points per minute fantasy producers in the league last year. He's also somebody who's not all that popular for this slate. We currently have Robert Williams projected for 1.8% ownership over on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he is projected for 4.3% ownership at 5,100. So he's somebody that I'm overweight to the field on, about 3x the field. I think that he makes for a really good tournament option, and I feel pretty good about his minutes, at least relative to what I was expecting because we don't have Al Horford in there.
All right, let's go back just for people that are coming in late, kind of straggling there. The news with Terry Rozier comes out, and you mentioned it's not necessarily impacting a guy that you were already heavy on, but elsewhere, what was your immediate reaction and kind of move internally with Charlotte?
Ultimately ended up being nothing. Kelly Oubre is somebody who got a bump in projection for me without Terry Rozier in there, but it didn't end up ultimately mattering because it's a slate where there's enough value plays, there's enough good options that even with Kelly Oubre being a guy who I end up projecting for over 30 fantasy points at a 5,600 price tag on DraftKings, it still wasn't enough value for me to get to in any kind of meaningful way. So really the main takeaway from the Charlotte situation is Lonzo Ball to me is the number one overall pay-up option at the point guard position. And in terms of value plays, it didn't really create anything that stood out.
Yeah, you were already high on Ball as is, so that didn't change anything at all.
Correct. Yeah. I think that I think there wasn't really too much value that opens up from the Rozier news as much as there would be for other slates, just because for the first slate of the year, particularly on DraftKings, the rookies are just egregiously priced, in my opinion, where we've got, Chris Duarte really cheaply priced and playing an important role, Jalen Green, Josh Giddey. So when you have all these guys that are already all that cheap, make for good value plays, it's I don't want to play Cody Martin or something like that because he might get to 22 minutes when he's not a great fantasy producer.
All right, my friend. We have PrizePicks coming up here where we can really get into and build a ticket for you, a winning ticket for you on prizepicks.com. So make sure you hang with us. Appreciate all of you as lock is about to happen right now. Hit that thumbs up button, please, if you haven't already. And Greg has thoroughly prepared you, despite me getting in the way, for your entire 11-game slate tonight. So hit him up. Thank him on Twitter, at Ehrenberg DFS, at Shander Show for me. Locked in, and now we hit PrizePicks. Now, there's no special music or anything that Tyler plays, right? We just go and easily transition, backflip into the pool here with this, as we're going to not start focusing on PrizePicks. All right, Greg? I didn't know if you expected like any flash dynamics or anything like that.
No, but I also want to tell people that even if you are not somebody who's playing on PrizePicks tonight, if you're not building prop cards, who knows what kind of injury news could break in the next 30 minutes. So you could definitely stick around and you guys could just wait to see, hey, maybe there's a starting lineup we didn't expect. Maybe somebody gets unexpectedly scratched. So stick around, leave the show on, because if anything happens news-wise, we're still going to have you covered and we're going to be going over that as well.
All right, well, let's jump in, man. And you see right there, Tyler has it up now for tonight. Points we can start. And I'm curious because Ball was somebody that you mentioned, especially from a DFS standpoint, that you're heavy on. Do you like his points at 21 tonight for prizepicks.com?
Well, I'm going to have this. The game's already lost, so we should probably go through games that have not started yet that people could pick props on.
I thought it was refreshed there for people that already got in, but that's fine.
So the games that have already started,
even though it's, but that's locked on you sure on PrizePicks, even though the counter is still ticking?
It's
got it.
But we should do the later games because it's more actionable. Just because
that's fine.
I know what is. I know it's preferred. So if potentially somebody could go to have like a couple of minutes to go and play a Charlotte prop, but in terms of the 7 o'clock games, we already had Indiana Charlotte for DFS purposes locked. Detroit Chicago, that game is locked. So I think we should look at some of these later games and see what we could find here props wise. Also, if anybody has any questions that they want about PrizePicks, any particular players that stand out to them, throw a question in the Discord channel, and I'll be sure to answer any PrizePicks questions.
All right, we have a little bit. How about this for? I don't know. Is that Celtics Knicks game count as one to talk on, or is that too early of a tip?
No, we could talk about it.
Okay. So Julius Randle is a guy that you've been heavy on in Live Before Lock. His points right now on prizepicks.com. And again, use our promo code Awesemo. We're going to match your first deposit up to $100. That's a lot of damage you can do, and use it right now tonight. Randle's at 23.5 points. Do you like that number on prizepicks.com specifically?
That is a very efficient number. That is right around where I have him projected. So for DFS purposes, I love Randle today when he's priced, in the 8K range. I think it was 8,600 on FanDuel, 8,800 on DraftKings. But that's also because I think that Julius Randle is somebody who's going to have right around what I've projected, like 23 points, 10 rebounds, a handful of assists, play a bunch of minutes. But I think that's a really good number that they have set there for Julius Randle at 23 points.
Anybody else in that game from a point standpoint? Fournier has a little bit lower of that number, clearly at 12.5. Jason Tatum as well, looking at him, that's a super high number, 27.5. So not sure if that's maybe too high for you to sneak under.
By the way, did my internet go out for a second or something?
I don't know. I can hear you fine.
All right, they thought I left, but hey, I'm still here. We are good to go.
You haven't gone anywhere. I've been hearing you this whole time.
Yeah, but maybe we're not live anymore. We got kicked off YouTube. But sorry, what was the players you wanted to ask me about, Eytan?
Jason, let's start with Tatum at 27.5. I was looking at Tatum and Brown specifically from a point standpoint. Tatum is at 27.5, Jaylen Brown at 19.5.
Yeah, so that's a number with Jaylen Brown. They've definitely nerfed a little bit because of the news involved with him. Considering the situation he's gone through, he was questionable to play all day today, and now he has officially been active, but he is expected to play in shorter bursts. So I wouldn't expect that we're getting 35, 36 minutes from Jaylen Brown, but he's somebody for the season should probably be averaging over 20 points per game. So they've already priced this appropriately down to the 19 points. I think that's a pretty reasonable number for Jaylen Brown. I don't know what it was earlier in the day, but I wouldn't have been surprised if earlier there might have been a 21.5 or 22 or something like that on Jaylen Brown. But it looks like it's been corrected for the news. And the Jason Tatum number, where'd you say that he was at?
27.5.
That's also, to me, a pretty efficient number with Jason Tatum. Something else to consider with the Boston Celtics this year is they don't have Kemba Walker. And I know that Kemba Walker last year missed a whole bunch of games, and he wasn't able to play on a lot of back-to-backs because of the knee issue. But the fact that he's out of the lineup now, and that we're going to have Jaylen Brown likely playing somewhat limited minutes, not that I think we're getting 22 minutes from Jaylen Brown, but somewhere around 30 minutes. I think Jason Tatum should carry a pretty heavy usage load, but once again, that is a game against the Knicks, which is not great from a pace standpoint. The total is only set at 219.5, so a little bit of a down pace spot for Jason Tatum. I think that's, once again, a pretty efficient number.
Trying to look for maybe somebody who's too high that you can maneuver underneath, or maybe a low number. So I'll give you two, and on the complete opposite end of this here. Let's move to this Phoenix game, Phoenix versus Denver here, and start with the Suns. Jay Crowder, who we know can get points on the board in a hurry, watching in the playoffs. 10.5 tonight is his point total. On the other side, you have Michael Porter Jr., who is 10 points higher than that at 20.5. Either of those flexible enough for you to make a play on?
These are also ones that are really close to what I have projected. Is there any number that stands out to you that you think is like, oh, this is one that I absolutely have to play, that is great value? Do you think that maybe we could build some cards around?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, on the surface, I thought Porter might be a little too high, but just looking from a scoring standpoint, for example, Lillard's at 30.5, right? That's going to be pretty tight, especially with expectation. Fox at 25.5. So maybe it's more of a second or a secondary or tertiary guy. Rashawn Holmes at 13 points. Is that too high for you to go and go under that, knowing that he's going to have some volume as far as minutes is concerned? Like Harrison Barnes is right there at 14, just a point over. So it's not a big name with a high point productivity, but if it's trying to find maybe a number that's a little off, Halliburton at 14, I would have no problem going over that, taking on the Blazers late night tonight.
Yeah, actually, I think a lot of it's because of pace of play. Now you bring up those numbers. There's a bunch of guys who I have over those numbers. I have right around 15 points for Harrison Barnes, Halliburton, Rashawn Holmes. And the big reason for that is the total for that game is 234.5. That is the highest total of any game on today's slate. So I expect there's going to be a lot of scoring. That's something that got me to De'Aaron Fox, we talked about earlier in the show. So I think that game is one that could make sense to target some overs on. And then something else to consider, if we really do think this is going to be a real shootout, high-paced game, maybe take the overs on a few different players in this game, because there's a little bit of correlation there just from the standpoint of, hey, if there's going to be a lot of possessions in this game, there could be some players that hit the overs on the points totals. There should be some rebound props that hit the overs. So I do think that is a good game to target just based on the total.
Yeah, and I'm just, bouncing around real quick as before we move on from this specific prop here of scoring. You can see right next to that what Tyler has, PrizePicks.com behind us, Covington. So if they're lower numbers, right, and that may be closer to an efficient number that you have, but Covington in single digits at 8.5. And, I know you talked about Giddey earlier, especially on lock. He's at 10.5. Maybe that's a number that you can get over on with some minutes. But for the most part, that's Seth Curry, for example, 13.5. Actually, really like going over that number because I think he's the guy that steps in as the easy third option on offense. And look, Ben Simmons wasn't a knockdown jump shot shooter by any means, but he did score 14 a night. Yes, I'm positive. Last I checked, at least. But Curry at 13.5, Greg, I really like going over there because I think, again, outside of Embiid and Tobias Harris, that's an easy spot for Curry to step in, especially as we mentioned with the spacing now that's opened up a little more so with Embiid and some shooters around him.
Yep. No, I think that's sensible, especially if you're not sold, if anybody isn't sold that on Tyrese Maxey being the guy who runs point guard for the Sixers today. Yeah. I mean, Steph Curry is going to play minutes at point guard today. We mentioned Isaiah Joe before. Somebody brought up who's going to play the backup point guard minutes for the Sixers today. And Isaiah Joe's in the mix, but I think it's primarily going to be Steph Curry. And as long as the ball's in his hands, he's not going to be afraid to shoot. We saw that in some playoff games last year where Steph Curry absolutely went nuclear and won playoff games for Philly just on his ability to shoot the ball. So I don't think that's a bad shout at all. I think he certainly stands to benefit from the absence of Simmons.
We have Christian Wood projected pretty high, 33 plus minutes tonight. Any interest in, before we hit some other props, any interest in going over his number at, just had it here. I don't know where it went, but any interest in going over his scoring number? I think it was 20.5 for Wood. Yep. 20.5 for Wood.
Oh, that
against
is
Minnesota.
I mean, that is right where I have him projected for. So I think that's an efficient number. Once again, it's also, it's a pretty high number for Christian Wood, who John Wall's not going to be in the mix for Houston this year, but they're replacing him with Jalen Green, who I think should be a fairly high usage player. They also have Eric Gordon is going to be in the starting lineup. So he's somebody who should eat up a good amount of usage. And then off the bench for them also, I really like Sengun, who is their first round pick, who I thought was one of the better steals of the draft towards the end of the first round. I think that he's somebody who ultimately is probably going to end up starting over Daniel Tice as the year winds on for the Houston Rockets. But yeah, either way, I mean, I think that there's nothing wrong with that 20.5 number for Christian Wood. I just think it's a very good number they've set.
Your guy, LaMelo, man, 6.5 rebounds right there. And I know we're going to move to some later games. Oh, that just locked. So we'll move on. I was just going to mention that really quick in passing. Bradley Beal, how about OG? OG has 6 rebounds, and this game is under a half hour out, so plenty of time to get in on all of this on prizepicks.com. I know Kuz was getting some love. We'll hit on Scotty Barnes as well, since he was a hot topic for you tonight on Lock. But OG taking on the Wizards has an over-under of 6 rebounds tonight, Greg. And on the surface, I would think that number is a little low for him in this matchup.
I mean, he's not really a prolific rebounder. So last year, we saw him average 5.5 rebounds per game. And I think he's going to take a step forward this year. But I think where a lot of his contributions are going to come from in terms of his improvement from a fantasy perspective is going to be higher usage. No Kyle Lowry in the picture this year. Pascal Siakam is out for the first month or so of the season. So I think we're going to see more usage going to OG Anunoby, but I don't think we're going to see a massive uptick in rebounds. So I think that number is, pretty accurate. Another thing to consider here, we were unsure if Chris Boucher was going to play tonight. He was dealing with a thumb injury or dislocated finger. I forget exactly what finger it was, but either way, some sort of finger injury in the preseason. And it looked like he was going to miss a considerable amount of time to open the season. Now, and then unexpectedly yesterday, he said that he was going to be able to play on opening day. So I look at that situation with Anunoby, where still in the front court, there's Precious Achiuwa, there's Chris Boucher, there's Khem Birch. There's guys who are going to pull down rebounds. And I think that OG Anunoby is a certain guy to consider betting on for most improved player of the year award this year. But in terms of rebounds, I don't think that's really what's going to change from. It's going to be the usage and the scoring.
All right, let's bounce around here. And I know based on what we have as far as our own projections compared to where there may be some maneuverability, if it's going under a higher number or finding a number that maybe doesn't make sense and you can go over it. How about Scotty Barnes? The number is low, but it's there for a reason, I think. I don't know how sharp 4.5 rebounds is to your comparison or at least projection of what you can get from Scotty tonight.
Yeah, I like the over for Scotty Barnes, and actually, I probably like the over for a handful of his props. Just from the standpoint of number one, it's a favorable matchup against the Washington Wizards. Defense sucked last year. I know they got rid of Russell Westbrook, which should help their defense a little bit, but not to the point where all of a sudden they become a great defense. So I like the matchup for the Raptors today. And Scotty Barnes, now that he's inserted in the starting lineup right away to start his career, I don't see any reason that he wouldn't play a big role right out of the gate. The Toronto Raptors are not a contending team this year. Best case scenario is they're a lower end playoff team. And I think that kind of, as long as he stays healthy, Scotty Barnes is probably going to be a guy that plays 30 plus minutes per night. So I think that he's somebody who in the draft, a lot of people are kind of up in arms that it was Scotty Barnes who got drafted by the Raptors instead of Jalen Suggs. But Suggs really struggled in the preseason. Also, if you just saw the Magic starting lineup that came out for today, they're not starting Suggs on opening night. They started Franz Wagner ahead of Jalen Suggs. So there's some definite concerns about Jalen Suggs right now to open the year. And I think a lot of people who were unhappy with the Scotty Barnes pick a couple months ago would now maybe look at that and say, like, okay, I could see the Raptors' logic there. But I think to start the year, we're looking at a really big role for Scotty Barnes, at least until Pascal Siakam comes back. So give me the over there for Scotty Barnes.
You mentioned there were a couple of overs that you liked there. Was it just in that game, or was just guys that you saw on screen?
No, Scotty Barnes.
Oh, okay. I thought there were other guys that you liked as far as from a rebounding standpoint that you saw that was over beyond Scotty. Sorry.
No, I'm saying kind of across the board. I like Scotty Barnes props. Like I would be over on his assists, over on points for Scotty Barnes. I'm bullish on him. Give me Scotty Barnes. I like him.
Yeah, man. I love it. There's nothing wrong with that. You're building a tower around Scotty Barnes tonight. Nothing at all wrong with that. I did see my guy Embiid here with 10.5 rebounds, and it's a giant number, I know, but no Zion, and I know Andre Drummond has inserted himself into the backup spot, but nobody's taking rebounds away from Joel Embiid by any means. So yes, it's a high number, and it's probably sharper compared to projections, but I like going over Embiid 10.5 rebounds tonight. I think this, again, if it's narrative or just matchup or a combination of both, I think this is a strong performance from Embiid tonight in both rebounding. I wouldn't even be shocked if he has high assists as well, but definitely with rebounds, I can go over the 10. I can live with going over the 10.5.
Yeah, and I think something else to add about the Pelicans, the matchup against them, is my only real concern here, actually, because I do have Joel Embiid projected over that number. The only thing I'd be a little bit concerned about is we know about Joel Embiid's health issues. Could the Philadelphia 76ers potentially be a little bit more cautious with his workload in the regular season, just for the idea of let's keep this guy healthy for the postseason? Because I don't think he was healthy for that series against the Atlanta Hawks. And
he wasn't.
Yeah, and especially the second half of some of those games, he was brutally bad. And I think that Ben Simmons kind of took away some of the attention of how much, like, Embiid really sucked in the second half of those games, but needed him to play well. And I just think he was fatigued. I think that he played a long regular season, and he was playing in back-to-backs. He was playing massive minutes. I think maybe they ease off the workload of Embiid. That would be my only concern on opening night, but I certainly haven't projected over that. Something else, though, that I wanted to bring up is Zion Williams does not average a lot of rebounds per game. And I think a lot of people just assume if somebody doesn't average a lot of rebounds per game, that means they're a bad rebounder. Not the case, though, because the Pelicans have had a better rebounding rate when Zion is on the court than when he's off the court. Kind of akin to somebody who comes to mind is Brook Lopez. Every single team that he's on has a considerably better rebound rate when he's on the court versus off the court. You don't have to be the guy who pulls down the rebound to be a good rebounder. If you're effectively boxing people out and allowing your teammates to grab rebounds, that also plays into you being a good rebounder, at least in my opinion. So I think that the Pelicans this year should probably take a little bit step back in rebounding to open the year, just because Zion's going to be out to open the season.
Yeah, Brandon Ingram, speaking of which, sitting at 5. So not sure if that is even too high based on your point about Zion being off.
Sorry, what was that? What was
the Brandon Ingram being too high at 5 rebounds?
So Brandon Ingram at 5 rebounds, I think.
I mean, we have him.
It's pretty accurate. That's right around where I have him. It's actually, I'm kind of surprised that the books have set a number that's that sharp. I would have expected him to maybe have a little bit higher of a rebounding number, but no, I think 5 looks probably pretty efficient. The Philadelphia 76ers also a good rebounding team, and he's going to have Jonas Valanciunas in the front court. He's going to pull down a lot of rebounds. So 5 is a good number to me on Ingram.
Valanciunas, you mentioned him. He's at 10.5. So maybe that's an avenue to talk about with Zion out and just productivity going somewhere. I'm just looking, Ayton's at 10.5, Gobert's all the way up to 13. We know that's going to be, if that high, it's going to be efficient. Jokic at 11, same with Nurkic. So these are the guys that are sitting at double-digit rebounds where maybe unlike Embiid, that number could be a little too high.
I think that number is actually really low. The main reason is because I was a little unsure of what we could see from Valanciunas' minutes this year, playing alongside Zion Williamson. I really like Valanciunas as a player, and I thought that he was the main reason that the Grizzlies were able to make a playoff push last year. But he didn't play a whole bunch of minutes consistent in the regular season last year. The fit next to Zion Williamson could be a little bit wonky at times, but with Zion out, I think we're going to see Valanciunas handle as many minutes as he possibly can at the center position. So I'm expecting really big things from him from a fantasy perspective in the first month or so of the season. Give me the over on Valanciunas' rebounds. I actually have him projected for to be one of the best rebounders of the day today.
All right. I know that the number is pretty much on point, just a little bit below with his average. But if there was a sharp number that I could throw out that I think can go over tonight, it would be Bridges at 4 rebounds. Again, it's the late game, take it on the Nuggets. But I think that I can get 5-6 rebounds from Bridges, hovering in that 4.5 career, I know, or at least average from last year. But looking at a couple of guys with lower numbers, he was the one who jumped out at me. I'm not going to take a risk with Buddy Hield at 4, De'Aaron Fox at 4, but I would be interested at least in going over 4 for Bridges.
And by the way, you said Mikal Bridges, correct?
Correct. Yes, Mikal Bridges.
Okay. So for Mikal Bridges, by the way, also something that's notable about Mikal Bridges, he just signed that big contract extension with the Phoenix Suns. So certainly a player that they're going to be committed to. Are you a little bitter that the Sixers gave up on him? He's one of, I mean, he's awesome. Mikal Bridges rules.
His mom worked for the organization, and then they traded his ass away on draft night. I mean, can you believe that? She quit like a month later, Greg. Yes, I'm still bitter. Yeah, you know who I won't even tell you who they drafted.
Who do they?
Zaire Smith.
No, that guy. He's been like decent in G League, hasn't he?
Yeah, but he's got every single possible physical ailment there is. He's like a walking injury.
Yeah, but here's the issue. You draft Mikal Bridges. He helps your NBA team. Does he really help your G League squad? Like Zaire Smith, he's really helping the 76ers G League squad.
I don't think he's anywhere near the Sixers. The Delaware 86ers. I don't think he's anywhere near them.
Yeah, I think he ended up getting cut and then got signed.
He's on the Memphis Hustle.
Oh, yeah, that team. Yeah.
You're right. He's helping some G League team out. It's the Memphis Hustle.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you should always do if you're mid to high first round pick, is you're trying to build your G League team. But anyway, as for the Mikal Bridges, I like the over on his rebound numbers. I think that he's somebody who broke out last year. Kind of went a little bit under the radar just because of the way that he contributed to the team, with primarily being one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA, which is not something a lot of people value a whole bunch, but clearly the Phoenix Suns do. That was the reason they gave him that big contract extension. And I think that once again, they're going to be committed to him this year with the financial commitment they made. I do expect them to play a little bit more minutes per game in the regular season. And I do project him over that rebound number.
All right, we'll get to a couple assists here, some 3-pointers on the way out. Again, use our promo code Awesemo on PrizePicks.com as we, myself, Greg, Tyler, help build this slip here for you. And we're going to match your first deposit up to $100. All right, as we have 15 plus minutes before that Washington-Toronto game locks, as well as the Memphis-Cleveland Knicks game against the Celtics. So just looking across the board here, Karl Anthony Towns, and I bring him up because his number seems pretty high on the surface at 5 assists, but he is your top DFS on lock, you mentioned, as far as the guy that you're paying for at the center position. Clearly a pathway to be the top 5 tonight, and I agree with you, even over Embiid. 5 assists, though. You would anticipate that it's going to come at least from some part of him passing the basketball. 5 assists on the surface seem pretty high. Doesn't mean he still can't dominate or break the slate with 4 assists tonight. Over? Are you going to go over 5 for Cat?
Yep, I am going to go over 5 for Cat. And the main reason is just because I think a lot of the offense is going to flow through him. You know, D'Angelo Russell, I do think is going to pick up a lot of assists, but still, D'Lo is a pretty high usage player. Anthony Edwards, I think, also is going to be a high usage player. Malik Beasley's coming off the bench. Once again, he's a high usage player. They're going to need somebody who's going to facilitate a lot of the offense beyond just some of the shots that D'Angelo Russell takes. And I think a lot of that is going to be starting with the ball with Karl-Anthony Towns in the high post. So I think that he's somebody who, he's not going to put up Jokic type assist numbers, but I think that he could put up some pretty big assist numbers this year, considering some of the talent around him. That also, the Houston Rockets defense is going to be absolutely abysmal this year. So Karl-Anthony Towns, he averaged 4.5 assists last year. I think we're going to see that on an uptick this year. So I'm going to say 5+ assists for Karl-Anthony Towns tonight. And I think he averages maybe even as close to 6 during the regular season.
Ooh, here's one to think about. Again, it's a low number, and I think it might be off by 1 assist, maybe even 1.5 assists. I'm going to go over 3.5 assists for Joel Embiid. Again, I think that with Tyrese Maxey being at least having the ball in his hands a lot, the ball is going to move as well, meaning like bringing it up, running the point. Embiid is going to benefit from having Green, Seth Curry out there, the spacing with Doc. It's going to look different than it did with Ben Simmons on the floor, especially on offense. And there's going to be a nice opportunity for Embiid to make a bunch of passes out from the post to a guy who's wide open. And I think Curry and Green can benefit from that the most this year, even Tobias Harris. So I'd go over 3.5 assists for Embiid, Greg.
Yep, I could totally get behind that. Also, when we're talking about some of the backup point guard minutes, one of the reasons it might not matter is kind of in a similar situation what I said about Karl-Anthony Towns before. I think we could see a lot of Joel Embiid, the offense for the Sixers, running through him in the high post. You know, Ben Simmons, I think, is kind of miscast as a point guard anyway. And now I think we could just see a lot of kind of point center Joel Embiid this year. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him with an uptick in assist numbers, you know, pending what ends up happening with the Ben Simmons situation. Who knows, maybe Ben Simmons comes back. Maybe they end up trading him and actually getting a point guard in return. But at least for now, you know, you're looking at Tyrese Maxey. He's more of a shoot-first guard. Same goes for Seth Curry. Joel Embiid could very well end up being the guy who leads the team in assists today.
It makes sense, too. If you look, you mentioned Jokic. If you have Cat, if you have a big who can facilitate, that's an advantage that you want to use, especially if your point guard is ball control and score first from that standpoint. Devin Booker's at 4.5, and I'm inclined to go under, knowing that we can see a 33-1 line from Devin Booker easily tonight. I don't know how sharp that is compared to your projections, but just from a super scorer, looking at a number of assists, always something that I like to look at as far as somebody that we know, in this case, Booker is probably one, if not the best example, so score focused that 4.5 may just be a little bit too high, and then you smash the under.
Let's see. So Devin Booker, I think the 4.5 number might actually be a little bit low. That's right around what he averaged last year, 4.3. But also don't forget, in previous seasons, we saw in 2019, 2020, averaged 6.5 assists per game, 2018, 2019, 6.8 assists per season. I think that some of the chemistry at times last year between Devin Booker and Chris Paul in the regular season was not quite perfect. I think there was a little bit of an acclimation here with Devin Booker playing a little bit more off ball. But yeah, I mean, the assists were still there for him for the most part last year. And given some of the assist numbers in the past, I don't have any issue with taking it over on that number.
All right. And I saw Scotty Barnes before that locked was at 0.5 Would you still, we have 11 minutes and 30 seconds before this locks. All you need is one from Scotty. You've been bullish on every single category so far. You can't fade him now, Greg.
By the way, also, yeah, totally agree. Everything Scotty Barnes over on. But also, yes. I want to mention before we finish, because somebody asked, we've got the Bird Nerd in YouTube chat saying, did Slack move somewhere? Yeah, it moved to Discord. So we're now using Discord as going to be our primary mode of answering questions and in terms of chatting, just like what we had with Slack before. But Bernard, we are now over on Discord. If you need help getting into it, send a message to support and they'll be able to help you out. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head who would be the guy to help you, but if you get to Terry McBride or the News God, either of them should be able to help you out. Or if not,
Nolan
yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, he just responded to that. There are links in the Slack for it. So, and look, Tyler just put that up there now, the Discord link. So this is it. If people have trouble, my goodness. And Terry's saying, yes, me, I'm the person. Look at that. You bring it up and immediately 15 people respond like, can we help you? Can we help you? That's what we do here, man.
So we do our best. And yeah, so Terry will be able to help you out there and get you into a Discord, not Slack anymore.
Barnes, yes, over the 3. Anybody too high? You're going to get 4 threes tonight from Jason Tatum. He sits at 3. I'm just looking at guys who Van Vliet is sitting at 3 tonight. I'd much rather take the 4 technically to make it from Van Vliet than Tatum. Bradley Beal is at 2 3-pointers tonight. I know that's not necessarily going to be the main focus for him, but 2 seemed a little low for Beal.
Yeah, I agree with that. Bradley Beal with no Russell Westbrook in the picture. There's going to be a whole bunch of usage going to Bradley Beal. He averaged 2.2 threes per game last year, 3 the year before. He hasn't averaged less than 2 threes per game since 2015, 2016. Those are back in the John Wall days. Are you serious? So yeah, that's actually a very low number.
Ooh, we may have found something that works on the way out. Look at that. Anybody else that you like from a 3-point standpoint as we come down here? Seth Curry's at 2.5. I have no problem going heavy over on that. I see Spiders at 3.5 as well. Chris Paul, Jay Crowder sneakily could get you 3 threes. He's at 2.5 tonight.
You said Jay Crowder?
Yeah, if you want to just end with Crowder.
What's the number?
2.5 for Crowder.
That's a pretty efficient number. But he was a crazy high volume 3-point shooter for the Suns, particularly in the playoffs last year. But yeah, he averaged 2.5 threes per game on the dot last year for Phoenix. So once again, 2.5 looks like a pretty efficient number.
4.5 for Lillard, man. You need 5 threes tonight to cover that, or are you just pounding the under?
I'm not pounding the under. It's probably a stay away due to the pace of play. But if I had to take one side, it would be the under. I think he hits less than. I think he hits 4 or less threes more than he hits 5 or more.
I was trying to get you to pound something on the way out, but that's fine. All good, brother. All right,
withheld.
We appreciate you riding with us on the extended live before lock into PrizePicks.com slate here, as we have built a couple of fresh over-unders for you to play on PrizePicks.com. Use our promo code if you haven't already. What are you doing? Awesemo, AWESEMO, and we're going to match your first deposit up to $100. Thanks to PrizePicks. Thanks to Tyler for producing. Thanks to you out there on the chat. Hit that thumbs up button on your way out. Make sure you're subscribed. Of course, we have 3 amazing channels, the DFS channel, our odds channel, and our fantasy football channel at Ehrenberg DFS. When you win a bunch of money on prizepicks.com tonight, make sure you tag him in that winning tweet. I'm at Shander Show, and we've covered a bunch, man. You got overtime for dealing with me. A little extra, I hope.
No, it's another 30 minutes, and it's good. We get to hang out. It's not like I was doing a show with Lindquist or anything like that. This was good.
Fair enough, my friend. Not going to argue that. Appreciate it. That's Greg. I'm Eytan. Have a great night. You're fully prepared from lock to prize picks. Good luck.